The rifle shot cracked through the Montana silence like thunder, echoing off the frozen peaks. Clara Whitmore stood in the snow, her stolen pistol smoking in her trembling hands, facing down the man who'd claimed to own her. "You want me back?" she whispered, voice deadly calm. "Then you'll have to kill us both." Behind her, Elias Ward, the hermit who'd saved her life only to steal her heart, raised his Winchester ready to die for the woman who'd taught him to live again. Welcome to a story of survival, redemption, and love forged in the harshest winter Montana ever saw. Stay with me until the end, and don't forget to comment your city below. I'd love to know how far this tale has traveled. The wind howled like a wounded animal through the peaks of Iron Fang Ridge, carrying with it the promise of another brutal storm. February 1879 had been the coldest in memory, and the Montana Territory showed no mercy to those foolish enough to challenge its dominion. High above the timberline, where even the hardiest pines dared not grow, a solitary cabin stood defiant against the elements, its logs weathered gray as old bones smoke rising from its stone chimney like a prayer to an indifferent sky. Inside, Elias Ward worked by lamplight, his massive hands moving with surprising delicacy as he carved another wolf from a block of pine. The blade whispered against the wood, peeling away curls that fell to join the pile at his feet. He'd been at it for hours, lost in the repetitive motion that kept darker thoughts at bay. The cabin walls were lined with his creation's wolves in every pose imaginable, running, hunting, howling at invisible moons. Some said it was madness, this obsession with carving the very creatures that haunted these mountains. Elias knew better. It was salvation. He paused, holding the half-formed wolf up to the light. The eyes weren't right yet. They never were. No matter how many times he tried, he could never capture that particular wildness, that freedom that real wolves possessed. His own eyes, reflected in the frosted window, held no such light. They'd gone dark 15 years ago, the night he dug 2 graves in the frozen earth and buried everything that mattered. "Getting soft in your old age," he muttered to himself, voice rough from disuse. At 43, he wasn't old by most standards, but the mountains aged a man differently. Each winter carved lines deeper than any blade. Each loss added weight that bent backs and broke spirits. His black beard, once proud and full, now carried threads of silver like premature frost. His shoulders, broad as a barn door, seemed perpetually braced against invisible burdens. The black stallion in the lean-to beside the cabin nickered softly, sensing his master's restlessness. Midnight had been his only companion these past 7 years, ever since he'd found the colt with a broken leg abandoned by Mustangers who deemed him worthless. Elias had seen something in those dark eyes, a kindred broken spirit perhaps, and nursed him back to health. Now Midnight was the finest horse in 3 counties, though few ever saw him. Like his master, the stallion had learned to distrust the world beyond their mountain sanctuary. Elias set down his carving and moved to the window, frost crackling under his palm as he cleared a small circle to peer through. The storm was coming faster than expected. Already the sky had taken on that peculiar gray-green cast that promised violence. He could feel it in his bones, the way they ached with remembered cold. 15 winters he'd weathered alone on this ridge, and each one tried harder than the last to kill him. So far, he'd disappointed them all. The people in Cedar Falls, the nearest town 2 days' ride below, had long since given up trying to coax him down from his self-imposed exile. They called him the Hermit of Iron Fang Ridge when they thought he couldn't hear, though most were too frightened to speak of him at all. The few times a year he descended for supplies, conversations died like flame-touched moths. Mothers pulled their children closer. Men found urgent business elsewhere. Only Tom Morrison at the general store would meet his eyes, and that was purely transactional goods for gold dust, no questions asked. It suited Elias fine. He'd learned the hard way that caring for people only led to loss. The equation was simple, and brutal love equaled pain. The mountains at least were honest in their cruelty. They didn't pretend to offer comfort only to snatch it away when you'd grown dependent on its warmth. He returned to his carving, but his hands wouldn't steady. Something felt different about tonight's approaching storm. The air tasted wrong, metallic and sharp like blood on steel. Midnight was pacing in his shelter hooves, striking the packed earth in an agitated rhythm. Even the wolves, the real ones, had gone silent, their usual twilight chorus absent from the peaks. Elias stood abruptly, the carved wolf tumbling from his lap. He'd survived this long by trusting his instincts, and every fiber of his being screamed that something was coming, something more than just another blizzard. He moved to the rifle mounted above the door, checking its load with practiced efficiency. The Winchester had saved his life more than once from both four-legged and two-legged predators. Tonight might add another tally to its stock. He pulled on his heavy buffalo coat, the one he'd taken from a trader who'd tried to cheat him 3 winters back. The man had learned that the hermit's isolation hadn't dulled his edge. If anything, it had honed it sharper. Elias had left him alive, but wiser, minus a coat and his pride. The mountains had their own justice, swift and merciless. Stepping outside, Elias scanned the darkening horizon. The wind cut through even the buffalo hide, finding every gap in his defenses. Snow had begun to fall, fat flakes that would soon become a white wall of death for anyone caught unprepared. Yet something drew his attention to the east toward the main pass that wound up from the valley, a sound barely audible above the wind. Voices no traveler with half a brain would attempt the pass in this weather. He stood perfectly still, a skill learned from countless hunts. There again. Definitely voices raised in alarm. And something else, the crack of wood splintering, the terrified scream of horses. "Damn fools!" he growled, but he was already moving toward Midnight's shelter. Every instinct told him to stay put, to let the mountains claim whoever was stupid enough to challenge them. But buried beneath 15 years of carefully cultivated indifference, something stirred. Not compassion, he'd burned that out of himself long ago, but perhaps the echo of the man he used to be. The man who would have ridden into hell itself to help someone in need. Midnight pranced nervously as Elias saddled him with quick, economical movements. "Easy, boy. We're just going to look. Nothing more." The horse's ears flicked back, unconvinced. He knew his master's patterns, and this deviation made him nervous. They rode out into the growing storm, horse and rider moving as one through the familiar terrain. Elias knew every rock, every tree, every treacherous drop on this mountain. He'd mapped it all in his mind during countless solitary rides, creating a fortress of knowledge that kept him safe from both the landscape and unwanted visitors. The sounds grew louder as they descended toward the pass. Definitely a wagon or coach in distress. Elias could hear the distinct crack of an axle breaking, followed by more screams. His jaw clenched. Coaches meant people from the outside world bringing their complications and their needs. He should turn back. Let the mountain take them. It would be a mercy compared to what awaited most folks in this harsh land. But he kept riding. The scene that greeted him around the next bend stopped even his hardened heart for a moment. A stagecoach lay on its side like a dying beast, one wheel still spinning uselessly in the air. The horses had broken free, their terror-wide eyes visible even through the snow as they fled. Luggage was scattered across the slope, already being buried under the relentless snowfall, and bodies he counted at least 2, neither moving. Elias dismounted, rifle in hand, approaching cautiously. The mountains had taught him that danger often wore the mask of vulnerability. The driver lay at an unnatural angle, his neck clearly broken. A male passenger in a fine city coat was pinned beneath the coach, blood pooling beneath him, already freezing in the cold. Dead. Both dead. He was about to turn away when he heard a sound so faint he almost missed it. A whimper, barely human, coming from inside the overturned coach. Against his better judgment, Elias climbed up to the door, now facing skyward, and peered inside. She lay crumpled against the far wall, a woman in traveling clothes that marked her as quality folk. Her dark hair had come loose from its pins, spreading like spilled ink across her pale face. Blood marked her temple, but her chest rose and fell with labored breaths. Alive, but not for long if left here. "Miss..." His voice came out rougher than intended. "Miss, can you hear me?" Her eyelids fluttered, revealing eyes the color of a summer sky, so out of place in this frozen hell that Elias felt something twist in his chest. Those eyes tried to focus on him, filled with pain and confusion. "Please," she whispered, her refined accent marking her as Eastern educated. "Please. Help." Every rational thought screamed at him to leave her. Taking her meant complications, meant breaking the sacred solitude that had kept him sane these 15 years. She'd probably die anyway, that head wound looked bad and the temperature was dropping fast. The merciful thing would be to make it quick, spare her the slow agony of freezing. But those eyes, Christ, those eyes reminded him of Sarah's, the way they'd looked at him with such trust, such faith, that he could keep her safe. He'd failed Sarah, failed their unborn child, failed at the most basic duty of a man to protect what was his. "Damn you," he muttered, though whether he cursed the woman himself or fate itself he couldn't say. He climbed into the coach, assessing her injuries with hands that remembered another lifetime when he'd tended to his neighbor's ailments before the war, before everything went to hell. Her left arm was broken, he could tell by the way it hung. Several ribs, too, from the careful way she breathed. The head wound was concerning but not immediately fatal. The real danger was the cold. Her lips were already tinged blue, her body shaking with violent tremors as it fought to maintain heat. "This is going to hurt," he warned, then lifted her into his arms. She cried out, the sound piercing the wind, but he didn't stop. Couldn't stop. The storm was becoming a monster, and they had minutes, not hours, before it became unsurvivable. He carried her to Midnight, who snorted nervously at the scent of blood. "Steady," Elias commanded, and the horse obeyed, though his ears remained flat against his head. Elias mounted awkwardly, cradling the woman against his chest, wrapping his buffalo coat around them both. She was so small, so fragile. How did someone like this even survive in the world? The ride back to the cabin was the longest of his life. The woman drifted in and out of consciousness, mumbling things he couldn't make out over the wind. Once she pressed closer to him, seeking warmth, and he felt his carefully constructed walls crack just a little. He urged Midnight faster, knowing that every second counted. By the time they reached the cabin, the storm had become a living thing, howling its fury at being cheated of prey. Elias half-carried, half-dragged the woman inside Midnight, following into his shelter without being led. Smart horse. This was no night to be outside. Elias laid the woman on his bed, the first person besides himself to touch it in 15 years. Her clothes were soaked through with snow and blood, already starting to freeze to her skin. He knew what had to be done, but his hands hesitated. It had been so long since he'd touched another person with anything approaching gentleness. "No choice," he muttered, and began cutting away her traveling dress with his hunting knife. Layers of fancy Eastern fabric fell away, revealing corsets and undergarments that seemed absurdly delicate in this rough place. He tried not to look tried to maintain some semblance of respect for her modesty, but doctors couldn't afford such luxuries. And that's what he had to be now. Not a man, but a healer. Her skin was like ice marked with purple bruises spreading like spilled wine. The broken ribs were obvious now, the swelling already starting. He splinted her arm with practiced efficiency, using strips torn from her own petticoats. For the ribs, all he could do was wrap them tightly and hope. The head wound needed cleaning. He heated water on the stove, adding a splash of the whiskey he kept for medicinal purposes. She stirred when he cleaned the gash, her eyes flying open in panic. "No, don't!" She tried to fight, but she was weak as a newborn fawn. "Easy," he said, holding her down as gently as possible. "You're safe. There was an accident. I'm trying to help." Those blue eyes searched his face, looking for truth or lies. Whatever she found there made her relax slightly, though her gaze remained wary. Who are you?" "Elias Ward. This is my cabin. You're on Iron Fang Ridge, about 10 miles from Cedar Falls." "The coach." "Gone. Driver's dead. Another passenger, too. You were the only survivor." She closed her eyes, and he thought he saw tears leak from the corners. "Mr. Garrett, he was kind to me during the journey." Elias didn't know what to say to that. Death was death. Kind or cruel, it came for everyone eventually. He finished cleaning her wounds in silence, then covered her with every blanket he owned. She needed warmth and fast. Her body's shaking had progressed from tremors to violent convulsions. He built up the fire until the cabin was almost unbearably hot. Then did something he hadn't done in 15 years. He lay down beside another person. Not touching, but close enough that his body heat might help. She unconsciously moved toward him, seeking warmth, like a plant seeking sun. "What's your name?" he asked, needing to keep her conscious to fight off the cold sleep that would mean death. "Clara Whitmore," she whispered. "Clara Whitmore. From Boston." Boston. Of course. No one else would be foolish enough to travel these passes in winter wearing silk and lace. What brings a Boston lady to Montana territory in the dead of winter? Her eyes opened again, and this time he saw something else besides pain, fear. Raw, desperate fear. I was traveling to California to meet my aunt. It was a lie. Elias had spent enough time reading the mountain's moods to know when someone was hiding something. But everyone had their secrets. God knew he had enough of his own. California is a long way from here, he said neutrally. Yes, she shivered again, pressing closer despite herself. I didn't expect. The weather turned so quickly. Always does up here. Mountains don't care about human plans. She studied him through half-closed eyes. You live here alone. Yes. Why? The question hung between them like a blade. Why did anyone choose isolation? Why did anyone willingly cut themselves off from human warmth, human connection? The answers were always the same: pain, loss, guilt, the holy trinity of hermitage. Mountains don't ask questions, he said finally. She seemed to accept that drifting into what he hoped was healing sleep, rather than the dangerous unconsciousness of hypothermia. Elias lay rigid beside her, every muscle tense. Her hair smelled of lavender, incongruous in this place of pine and smoke. When was the last time he'd smelled anything so civilized? The storm raged outside, shaking the cabin with its fury. But inside, for the first time in 15 years, Elias Ward was not alone. And that terrified him more than any blizzard ever could. Through the night, he kept watch. Clara's breathing steady deepened. The violent shaking subsided to occasional tremors. He'd kept her alive for now, but morning would bring new challenges. She'd need food, proper medical attention, and eventually a way back to civilization, back to whatever she was running from, because women like Clara Whitmore didn't take stagecoaches through Montana territory in winter, unless they were running from something worse than death. He rose before dawn, a lifetime habit that even exhaustion couldn't break. Clara had migrated fully against him during the night, her head on his shoulder, one small hand clutched in his shirt. He extracted himself carefully, but she still whimpered at the loss of warmth. The storm had blown itself out, leaving behind a world transformed. Snow lay thick as a man's waist, turning the familiar landscape alien. The path to Cedar Falls would be impassable for days, maybe weeks. Like it or not, Clara Whitmore was stuck here. Elias stood at the window watching the sunrise paint the peaks gold and pink. Behind him, Clara stirred, moaning softly in pain. He'd have to reset that arm properly today, check for infection, keep her fed and warm. All the things he'd done for Sarah before the fever took her, before everything went wrong. No, he said aloud, his breath fogging the glass. Not again. This was temporary. A few days, maybe a week, then she'd be gone. Back to her silk dresses and Eastern manners. Back to a world that had no place for men like him. He'd save her life because that's what decent men did, but he wouldn't care. Wouldn't let those blue eyes work their way past his defenses. Wouldn't let her lavender scent erase the smell of smoke and death that had clung to him for 15 years. He heard her wake properly, the sharp intake of breath as pain and memory returned. He didn't turn around. Mr. Ward, there's water by the bed. Drink slowly. I'll make some broth. Thank you for saving me. Don't thank me yet. You're a long way from safe. He busied himself at the stove, heating the venison broth he'd made days ago. Behind him, he heard her struggling to sit up, pride warring with pain. Stubborn. That might help her survive. The others, did they have families? Someone should be notified. I'll handle it when the pass clears. He wouldn't, of course. The bodies would be found come spring or not. The mountains would claim them either way. He brought her the broth, finally meeting her eyes in daylight. The bruising on her face was spectacular, purple and green, spreading like sunset clouds. But those eyes remained clear, intelligent, taking in everything about him in the cabin. You're not what I expected, she said. What did you expect? I don't know. The people in the coach, they spoke of a hermit on the mountain. Made you sound like some sort of monster. Maybe I am. She studied him over the bowl's rim. Monsters don't save people. You don't know what I've done. No, she agreed. But I know what you did last night. That has to count for something. Elias turned away, uncomfortable with her gratitude. He preferred fear. Fear kept people at a distance. Your arm needs proper setting. It's going to hurt." "I understand." But she didn't. Not really. When he manipulated the bones back into place, she screamed, the sound echoing off the mountains like an accusation. She passed out, which was a mercy. He finished the job properly, binding the arm with strips of rawhide and pine splints. It would heal if infection didn't set in. The day passed in strange rhythms. Clara slept. Elias carved, though his hands kept slipping, distracted by the sound of another person breathing in his space. He made more broth, checked her bandages, kept the fire roaring. Normal things. Domestic things. Things he'd sworn never to do again. When she woke in the afternoon, her fever had started. He'd expected it, the body's response to trauma, but it still sent cold fear through him. Fever had taken Sarah. Fever and blood, and a baby that came too soon. "Cold," Clara mumbled, though her skin burned to the touch. He bathed her face with cool water, fighting the fever's rise. She grabbed his hand in her delirium, holding it like an anchor. "Don't leave me," she begged. "Please don't leave me alone." "I'm here." The words came unbidden, a promise he didn't mean to make. She rambled in her fever dreams, fragments of a life lived in drawing rooms and garden parties. But darker things too. A name Richard spoken with such fear that Elias filed it away. Whatever she was running from had a name. The second night was worse. The fever peaked and Clara thrashed against demons only she could see. Elias held her down, afraid she'd worsen her injuries. She called for her mother, long dead by the sound of it. She begged Richard not to hurt her. She whispered secrets to the darkness that Elias tried not to hear. Just before dawn, the fever broke. She lay drenched in sweat, weak but lucid. Elias had fallen asleep, sitting up still, holding her hand. She studied their joined fingers with wonder, like she'd never seen such a thing. "You stayed," she whispered. He pulled his hand away, suddenly aware of the intimacy. "You were sick." "Still, you could have let me die. It would have been easier." "I don't do easy." She laughed, then winced as her ribs protested. "No, I suppose you don't." The next days fell into a pattern. Clara grew stronger, though slowly. She insisted on helping with small tasks, learning to stoke the fire one-handed, preparing simple meals while Elias hunted. They spoke carefully, dancing around their respective secrets, building a fragile détente. She was educated, that was clear. She could quote Shakespeare and discuss philosophy with surprising depth. But she also had practical skills he wouldn't have expected. She could sew with precision, calculate supplies with accuracy, and had a keen eye for weather patterns. "You're not what I expected either," he admitted one evening, watching her efficiently pluck a grouse he'd brought back. "What did you expect? Helplessness, tears, demands to be taken to town immediately. Would that work? No. Then why waste the energy?" She smiled, and it transformed her face despite the bruises. "My mother always said that adaptability was a woman's greatest weapon." Of course she meant adapting to dinner party conversations, not wilderness survival, but the principle holds. They fell into companionable silence, the kind Elias hadn't experienced since. He cut off that thought. This was temporary. In a week, maybe two, the past would clear and she'd leave. This strange interlude would end and his life would return to its careful emptiness. But that night, as Clara sang softly while mending her torn dress, an Irish lullaby his own mother had sung, Elias felt something shift inside his chest, a thawing like ice cracking on a frozen river. Dangerous. Potentially catastrophic. He went outside, needing air, needing distance. The moon was full, turning the snow-covered peaks into a fairy tale landscape. Beautiful and deadly, like everything in this place. Like the woman currently occupying his cabin, his thoughts, his carefully guarded space. Midnight nickered softly from his shelter, and Elias went to him, finding comfort in the horse's simple presence. "She'll leave soon," he told the stallion. "Things will go back to normal." But even as he said it, he knew it was a lie. Clara Whitmore had breached his defenses simply by existing in his space. Her lavender scent would linger, her laughter would echo. The cabin would feel emptier than before because now he'd remember what it felt like to not be alone. A wolf howled in the distance, answered by another, then another. A pack hunting together, surviving together. Elias had always identified with the lone wolves, the ones cast out, or choosing solitude. But listening to their chorus, he remembered that wolves were meant to run in packs. It was the lone ones who usually died. When he returned to the cabin, Clara was carving. She'd taken one of his rejected pieces and was carefully working it with a small knife, her movements tentative but determined. "What are you making?" She looked up, almost shy. "A bird. I thought, your wolves need something to hunt besides each other." He watched her work, noting the surprising steadiness of her hands, the focus in her eyes. She was carving a cardinal of all things, a bright spot of potential color in his monochrome world. "Why a cardinal?" "My mother loved them, said they were visits from heaven, loved ones checking in." She paused, blade hovering over the wood. "I know that's foolish." "No," Elias said quietly. "It's not." Their eyes met across the lamplight, and something passed between them. Understanding, perhaps, or recognition of kindred damaged souls. Whatever it was, it scared Elias more than any storm, any wolf, any physical danger ever could. Because Clara Whitmore, with her broken ribs and Boston accent, her cardinal and secrets, was making him feel things he'd buried with his wife and child. Things like hope, like possibility. Like maybe 15 years was long enough to punish himself for failing to save them. He turned away, busying himself with banking the fire for the night. "Pass might be clear in a few days. I'll check tomorrow." "Of course," Clara said. And was that disappointment in her voice? "I've imposed long enough." "You haven't imposed. You were dying." "Still, you've been very kind." "I haven't been kind. I've been practical. Dead woman in my cabin would be inconvenient." She laughed, but it sounded forced. "Yes, inconvenient." They prepared for bed with the awkwardness of strangers who'd shared too much too quickly. Elias had made a pallet by the fire, giving her the bed, but she stopped him with a gentle hand on his arm. "You don't have to sleep on the floor. I trust you." "You shouldn't." "Why?" "Because you're the terrible hermit of Iron Fang Ridge, the monster parents used to scare their children." She stepped closer, and he could smell the lavender again, mixed now with wood smoke and pine. "Or because you are a man who's been hurt so badly that isolation seems safer than connection." "You don't know me." "No, but I'd like to." The words hung between them like a challenge or an invitation. Elias felt the walls he'd built so carefully beginning to crumble. This woman, this stranger who'd literally fallen into his life, was offering something he'd forgotten existed: genuine human connection without conditions or expectations. "The pass," he said roughly. "Once it's clear, you'll go back to your world. Boston, California, wherever you were really heading." "And if I don't want to?" The question stunned him into silence. She couldn't mean it. She was fevered, still confused, grateful for his help. Once she was fully healed, once she remembered the comfortable life waiting beyond these mountains, she'd leave like everyone always left. "You don't know what you're saying." "I know that for the first time in my life I feel like I can breathe," she said. "I know that your cabin feels safer than any ballroom or mansion I've ever been in. I know that you look at me like I'm a person, not a prize or a possession or a problem to be solved. Clara, I know you're going to tell me I'm being foolish, that I'm romanticizing this situation, that I don't understand what isolation really means." She raised her chin, defiant. "But I also know that when Richard finds me, and he will find me, I'd rather face him here with you than anywhere else in the world." Richard, the name from her fever dreams. Elias felt his protective instincts stir, dangerous and long dormant. "Who is Richard?" Clara's courage seemed to falter. She turned away, moving to the window to stare out at the moonlit snow. "My fiancé, or rather the man who decided I would be his wife. Richard Peyton. You might have heard of him. He owns half the railways in the East." Elias had heard the name. Even in his isolation, certain news filtered through. Peyton was powerful, ruthless, known for destroying anyone who opposed him. "You ran." "I ran." She pressed her palm against the cold glass. "The night before our engagement party. Took what money I could, bought passage on the first stage heading west. I thought I could disappear, start over. But men like Richard don't accept rejection. He'll come for me." "Let him come." The words were out before Elias could stop them. Clara turned, surprise evident on her face. You don't understand. Richard has money men influence. He could destroy you without even being here himself. I've already been destroyed. Can't kill a dead man. You're not dead. Aren't I? He moved closer, drawn despite himself. 15 years I've lived on this mountain. No connections, no feelings, no purpose beyond survival. That's not living. That's just existing. And now, he was close enough to touch her to see the gold flecks in her blue eyes, the way her pulse fluttered in her throat. Now, there's a cardinal in my wolf den. She smiled sad and sweet. Cardinals don't last long in the wilderness. This one might, if she wanted to, if she was strong enough. I'm not strong. I'm scared all the time. Being scared doesn't mean you're not strong. You got on that stage. You ran from a powerful man. You survived a crash that killed 2 others. You're here still fighting. That's strength. Tears slipped down her cheeks, and without thinking, Elias wiped them away with his thumb. The touch was electric, 15 years of isolation shattered by the simple contact of skin on skin. Elias? She breathed, and his name on her lips was like spring after endless winter. He pulled back the moment, too intense, too dangerous. You should rest. Your ribs... My ribs are fine. But she let him retreat, understanding his need for distance. Good night, Elias. Good night, Clara. He did sleep on the pallet by the fire, staring at the flames while she settled in his bed. But he was aware of her every breath, every shift, every soft sigh. She was rewriting his carefully ordered world simply by existing in it. The next morning brought new snow, closing the pass more firmly than before. Elias told himself he was disappointed. Told himself he wanted her gone, wanted his solitude back. But when Clara smiled at him over breakfast, when she laughed at Midnight's attempts to steal her biscuit through the window, when she insisted on helping him organize his hunting supplies, he felt that dangerous thawing continue. They developed new routines. Clara learned to help with his wolf carvings, her smaller fingers better at detail work. He taught her to read the weather, to identify animal tracks, to find edible plants even in winter. She told him stories of Boston society, making him laugh with her satirical descriptions of pompous suitors and ridiculous fashion trends. He found himself sharing memories he'd locked away his childhood in Ohio, his service in the war, even carefully edited stories of his life before the mountain. One evening, as they worked companionably by lamplight, Clara asked, what were their names? He didn't pretend not to understand. Sarah, and we were going to call the baby James if it was a boy. We never decided on a girl's name. How did they? Fever. Started with Sarah, spread to half the valley. I tried everything, medicines, prayers, bargains with God. Nothing worked. She died in my arms, taking the baby with her. I burned the farm that night. Couldn't stand to see the places where we'd been happy. Claire reached across the table, covering his hand with hers. It wasn't your fault. Wasn't it? I was supposed to protect them? From fever, from acts of God. Elias, you're not that powerful. No one is. I should have done something, anything. You loved them. Sometimes that's all we can do. He turned his hand over, interlacing their fingers. Is that what you did with Richard? Loved him? Clara laughed bitterly. No, never. He saw me at a garden party, decided I would make an appropriate wife. My father owed him money, so the deal was struck. I was currency, nothing more. Your father sold you. Debts must be paid, and Richard always collects. She squeezed his hand. But I'm here now. However temporarily, I'm free. You could stay free. The words hung between them, an offer and a question. Clara's eyes searched his face. You don't mean that. I never say things I don't mean. Elias, I'm grateful for everything you've done, but gratitude isn't... He kissed her. It was clumsy, desperate 15 years of loneliness poured into one impulsive gesture. She froze, and he started to pull away, apologies forming, but then she was kissing him back, her free hand tangling in his hair, pulling him closer. They broke apart, breathing hard, staring at each other in shock. That wasn't gratitude, Clara whispered. No. I don't know what this is. Neither do I. But they were kissing again, careful of her injuries, but hungry for connection. She tasted like hope and danger, and everything Elias had denied himself for so long. When they finally separated, both were trembling. "The pass," Clara said weakly. "It'll clear soon. Maybe. You'll want your cabin back, your solitude. Maybe. Elias, stay." The word escaped him raw and desperate. "I know I have no right to ask. I know you could have better deserved better, but stay." She studied him for a long moment, then smiled. "Until the pass clears. We'll see what happens when the pass clears." It was a reprieve, not a promise, but Elias would take it. That night she insisted he share the bed for warmth, she claimed. Though the cabin was plenty warm. They lay carefully apart at first, but by morning she was curled against him, his arm around her waist, her head on his chest. It felt right in a way nothing had felt right in 15 years. The days that followed were the happiest Elias could remember since Sarah. Clara grew stronger, her bruises fading, her ribs healing. She took over the cooking, proving surprisingly adept at making simple ingredients taste complex. She organized his chaos, creating systems that somehow made sense. She even convinced Midnight to accept her presence, bribing him with precious sugar until the horse would follow her like a giant dog. They didn't talk about the future, didn't discuss what would happen when the snow melted. They lived in a bubble of present tense each day, a gift neither had expected. But the mountains have their own timeline, and spring comes whether you're ready or not. It was a morning in early March when they heard the horses. Multiple horses picking their way carefully up the partially cleared trail. Clara went white, her hand flying to her throat. "He found me." Elias was already reaching for his rifle. "Get in the root cellar. Don't come out no matter what you hear." "No, if it's Richard, hiding won't help. He'll burn the cabin down to find me." Through the window they could see the riders approaching. 5 men, all armed, led by a figure in an expensive coat that looked absurdly out of place in the wilderness. Even at a distance, Richard Peyton radiated menace. "Together," Clara said, surprising Elias by taking down his hunting rifle. "We face him together." They stepped onto the porch as the riders entered the clearing. Richard dismounted with theatrical deliberation, his pale eyes fixed on Clara. He was handsome in the way a snake is beautiful, all smooth surfaces hiding poison. "Clara, darling, you've led me quite a chase. How did you find me?" "Money opens many doors, my dear, or in this case, many mouths. The coach driver who sold you the ticket remembered you. The survivors in Cedar Falls remembered hearing about the hermit who came down for supplies asking after medical items. Simple deduction from there." "I'm not coming back with you." Richard's smile was all teeth. "Of course you are. You're my fiancé. We have a contract." "You have a contract with my father. I signed nothing." "Semantics." He gestured to his men. "I've come to collect my property." That's when Elias stepped forward, rifle casual but ready. "The lady says she's not going." Richard seemed to notice him for the first time, eyes scanning dismissively. "And you are the man whose land you're on, the man telling you to leave." "Ah, the famous hermit. Tell me what's your interest in my fiancée. Has she been compromised during her stay?" The implications in his tone made Elias's finger itch for the trigger. "Miss Whitmore has been a guest, nothing more." "Miss Whitmore? How formal. And yet she's wearing your shirt, living in your cabin, alone, for weeks." Richard's smile grew colder. "The scandal will be delicious. Unless, of course, she returns with me now, and we forget this unfortunate incident." "There's no scandal if I'm dead," Clara said quietly, and everyone turned to look at her. She held the hunting rifle with surprising steadiness. "And I'd rather be dead than return with you." "Don't be dramatic, darling." "I'm not being dramatic. I'm being honest." She addressed Richard's men. "He's not paying you enough to die here, because that's what will happen if you try to take me. Mr. Ward will kill some of you. I'll kill at least one. Maybe you'll succeed in the end, but at what cost is Richard Peyton's money worth your lives?" The men shifted nervously. They were hired guns, not soldiers. Doubt crept into their faces. Richard's composure cracked. "You belong to me. I belong to no one." Clara's voice rang with conviction. "I choose where I go, who I'm with, how I live. And I choose here. Here." In this hovel, with this savage? Yes. The simple word seemed to break something in Richard. He reached for the pistol at his hip, but Elias was faster. The Winchester boomed, and Richard's gun went spinning into the snow, taking 2 of his fingers with it. Richard screamed, clutching his mangled hand. His men raised their weapons, but Elias had already levered another round, and Clara's rifle was steady on the leader. "Take him and go," Elias commanded. "Now!" One of the men, older and wiser than the others, nodded. "Come on, Mr. Peyton. We need to get that hand seen to." "This isn't over," Richard snarled through his pain. "I'll be back, with more men. I'll burn this mountain down if I have to." "Try it," Clara said. "But know this, I've written letters. To newspapers, to your competitors, to certain government officials who would be very interested in your business practices. If anything happens to me or Mr. Ward, those letters get sent. Your empire will crumble, Richard. Is one runaway bride worth that?" Richard stared at her, perhaps seeing her clearly for the first time. Not a possession, but a formidable opponent. The calculation in his eyes was visible revenge versus risk. "You're not worth it," he said finally, the words intended to wound. "Keep your hermit and your hovel. You'll regret this choice." "The only thing I regret is not running sooner." They watched the riders leave, neither moving until they were specks in the distance. Then Clara dropped the rifle and fell into Elias's arms, shaking. "It's over," he murmured into her hair. "You're safe." "Am I?" He could come back. "Let him try. This is my mountain. I know every rock, every tree, every hidden spot. He'd never make it to the cabin." She pulled back to look at him. "You'd fight for me. I'd die for you. I don't want you to die for me. I want you to live with me." She touched his face, tracing the lines that years of isolation had carved. "If you'll have me, if this wasn't just about protection. Clara, you could go anywhere now, be anyone. Why would you stay here? Because here is where you are, because your wolves need their cardinal, because I've never felt more myself than I have these past weeks." She smiled, tears streaming down her face. "Because I love you, you ridiculous, wonderful hermit." Elias couldn't speak. Love, she'd said, love. After everything, after all the loss and pain and years of emptiness, love had found him again in the form of a Boston socialite with a broken arm and the courage of a mountain cat. "I love you too." He managed the words rusty but true. "I didn't think I could anymore, but you. You brought me back to life." Then we saved each other. They kissed on the porch, in full view of the mountains and sky claiming each other and this life they'd chosen. When they finally went inside the cabin, felt different. Not a refuge anymore, but a home. That night, as they lay together properly together, Clara traced the scars on his chest from the war, from the wilderness, from life itself. "We match now," she said, indicating her own healing injuries. "Battle scars. Survival marks." She kissed one particularly nasty scar over his heart. "Thank you for surviving, for being here when I needed you. Thank you for crashing into my life," she laughed. "Literally, best disaster that ever happened to me." Spring came slowly to Iron Fang Ridge, each day bringing subtle changes that only someone who'd lived there for years would notice. The ice on the creek began its musical breaking, creating symphonies that echoed through the valley. Small green shoots pushed through the snow in sheltered spots, defiant and hopeful. And in Elias Ward's cabin, 2 lives were carefully weaving themselves together, learning the delicate dance of shared space and shared hearts. Clara had taken to mountain life with a determination that surprised them both. Her hands, once soft from a lifetime of leisure, grew calloused from splitting kindling and hauling water. She learned to read the sky's moods, to distinguish between the call of a hawk and an eagle, to move through the forest without startling the deer. But she brought her own changes, too. Wildflowers in tin cans on the windowsill. Books she'd managed to save from the wreckage arranged on a shelf Elias built, and most remarkably, laughter that rang through the cabin daily. "You're humming again," Elias observed one morning, watching her knead bread dough with increasing expertise. "Was I mother would be horrified. Ladies don't hum while doing manual labor." "Good thing you're not a lady anymore, then." She flicked flour at him, leaving a white streak across his beard. "I'll have you know I'm still perfectly ladylike. I just happen to be a lady who can skin a rabbit and shoot a rifle. My kind of lady. The easy affection between them still felt miraculous to Elias. After years of carefully maintaining his emotional isolation, having someone to talk to touch, to care for, was like learning to breathe all over again. Sometimes he'd wake in the night, feel Clara warm against him, and have to fight the urge to shake her awake just to confirm she was real. But the ghosts of their pasts hadn't vanished entirely. Clara still had nightmares about Richard finding them, would wake gasping and reaching for the rifle they kept by the bed. And Elias sometimes found himself pulling back when happiness felt too easy, too complete, as if joy itself was a trap waiting to spring. It was on a particularly warm April morning that Clara brought up the subject they'd both been avoiding. "We should go to town," she said, not looking up from the shirt she was mending. "We need supplies, and people should know." "Know what?" "About us. That I'm here by choice. That we're—" She trailed off, uncertain what to call themselves. "Together," Elias finished. "You want people to know we're together. Don't you?" He set down the trap he'd been repairing, considering. The thought of facing the townspeople, of seeing their judgment and speculation, made his skin crawl. But Clara deserved better than to be hidden away like a shameful secret. "They won't understand," he warned. "A Boston lady choosing to live with the hermit? There'll be talk." "Let them talk. I've been the subject of gossip my entire life. At least now it'll be about choices I've actually made." They made the journey 3 days later, Clara riding midnight while Elias walked alongside. She'd become an accomplished rider, though Midnight still only fully trusted Elias. The mountain trail that had once seemed treacherous to her was now familiar, each twist and turn memorized. Cedar Falls hadn't changed much in the months since Elias's last visit, but their arrival caused an immediate stir. People stopped mid-conversation to stare. Children were pulled closer to their mothers. And through it all, Clara held her head high, meeting every gaze with calm dignity. Tom Morrison at the general store nearly dropped his ledger when they walked in together. Elias and, "Ma'am?" His eyes darted between them, taking in Clara's practical dress. One of Elias's shirts tucked into a skirt she'd fashioned from salvaged fabric, and the easy way she stood beside the hermit. "Miss Clara Whitmore," she introduced herself, extending her hand. "I'll be needing to set up an account if that's possible." "An account?" Tom looked desperately at Elias for explanation. "Miss Whitmore is staying at the cabin," Elias said simply. "Permanently." The word sent whispers rippling through the store. Several customers found urgent reasons to linger, pretending to examine goods while straining to hear more. Clara moved through the store with purpose, selecting flour, sugar, salt, ammunition, and seeds for a garden she was planning. She chatted pleasantly with Tom about the weather, asking advice about what grew best at altitude, acting as if there was nothing unusual about the situation at all. "You'll be wanting fabric too." Tom's wife, Margaret, emerged from the back room, her expression curious but not unkind. "That skirt won't last long doing mountain work." "I'd appreciate that," Clara smiled. "I'm afraid my Boston wardrobe wasn't designed for practical living." "Boston?" Margaret's eyebrows rose. "You're a long way from home, miss." "I am home," Clara corrected gently. "This is home now." The two women studied each other for a moment, then Margaret nodded slowly. "Well then, let me show you our strongest fabrics. You'll want something that can stand up to mountain living." As the women discussed cloth, Elias found himself cornered by several men who'd suddenly discovered urgent business near the ammunition display. "That the woman from the coach wreck?" asked Ben Hayes, the blacksmith. "Yes." "Heard she was some rich Eastern lady." "She was. And now she's living with you." "Yes." Ben waited for more explanation, but Elias offered none. Finally, the blacksmith shrugged. "Well, stranger things have happened, I suppose, though not many." "She seems nice," offered another man. "Polite. Not what I expected from Boston folk." "She's not what anyone expects," Elias said, and something in his voice made the men exchange glances. "You seem different, Elias," Ben observed. "Less frightening," Elias supplied with dark humor. "I was going to say angry, but frightening works too." Before Elias could respond, the door burst open and young Timothy Morrison, Tom's son, ran in gasping. "Papa Riders coming, lots of them. They look like trouble." Elias was moving before the boy finished speaking, rifle in hand. Clara appeared at his side, Margaret's borrowed shawl forgotten. "How many?" Elias demanded. 8, maybe 10, all armed." "Richard," Clara whispered, her face pale but determined. They stepped onto the store's porch to see the riders entering town, dust swirling around them like harbingers of violence. But the man leading them wasn't Richard Peyton. He was older, harder, with the kind of dead eyes that came from years of doing other people's dirty work. "Looking for someone," the leader announced to the gathered townspeople. "Woman named Clara Whitmore. Heard she might be in these parts." "What's your business with her?" Elias stepped forward, rifle casual, but ready. The man's gaze fixed on him, then shifted to Clara. "There you are, miss. Mr. Peyton sends his regards." "I thought we settled this." "You settled it. Mr. Peyton has different ideas. See, he doesn't like being embarrassed. And you running off, shooting at him, threatening him. That's embarrassing. So he sent you to what? Drag me back." "Oh no, miss. He's done wanting you back. Now he just wants you to understand that nobody crosses Richard Peyton without consequences." The threat hung in the air like smoke from a distant fire. Several townspeople backed away, not wanting to be caught in whatever was coming. "You're threatening her." Elias's voice was dangerously quiet. "Just delivering a message. Mr. Peyton wants you both to know he hasn't forgotten. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but someday. When you feel safe, when you've forgotten to look over your shoulder, that's when he'll collect what's owed. The only thing owed here is you leaving this town." Sheriff Coleman stepped forward, his own rifle prominent. "Right now." The hired gun smiled, showing too many teeth. "We're going, Sheriff. Just wanted to make sure the message was received." As they turned to leave, Clara called out, "Wait!" Everyone froze, including Elias. She walked down the porch steps, moving with the grace she'd learned in Boston ballrooms, but with a steel that was all mountain forged. "Tell Richard something for me." "What's that, miss?" "Tell him I've written more letters. Detailed ones, about his dealings with Judge Morrison in Albany, about the fire at the Riverside factory that killed 12 workers, the one he had set for the insurance money. About Mary Sullivan, the maid who disappeared after refusing his advances." Clara's smile was sharp as winter ice. "Tell him those letters are in the hands of people who will mail them if anything happens to anyone in this town. Not just to me or Elias, anyone. If so much as a chicken goes missing mysteriously, Richard Peyton's empire burns to the ground." The hired gun's confidence visibly wavered. "You're bluffing." "Am I? Would you stake your employer's fortune on it? Your own life. Because when those letters get out, Richard won't be in a position to pay you anymore. In fact, he'll probably be too busy running from the law to worry about revenge." "How do we know these letters exist?" Clara pulled a sealed envelope from her pocket. "This is a copy of one. Take it to him. Let him read it and understand that I learned more in those months of our engagement than he thought. I was quiet, obedient, Clara always in the background. Amazing what men will say when they think women aren't smart enough to understand." The man took the envelope reluctantly, as if it might bite him. "One more thing," Clara added. "Tell Richard that if he's smart, he'll forget I exist. Because I've already forgotten him. He's nothing to me now, not even worth the energy of hatred." The riders left town faster than they'd arrived, and the gathered townspeople looked at Clara with new respect and not a little fear. "You really got those letters?" Margaret Morrison asked. "Every word is true," Clara confirmed. "I spent my last weeks in Boston gathering evidence insurance against exactly this situation." "That was brave," someone said. "That was survival," Clara corrected. Then she turned to Elias, who was looking at her with an expression she couldn't read. "Are you angry I should have told you about the letters?" "Angry?" He pulled her against him right there in front of everyone. "I'm in awe. You're magnificent." The public display of affection sent another wave of whispers through the crowd, but neither Clara nor Elias cared. They had bigger concerns than small-town gossip. Sheriff Coleman approached them. "Those men will be back. Maybe not those exact ones, but others. Men like Peyton don't give up easy." Then we'll be ready, Elias said. The town. Clara's one of us now. We protect our own. Ben Hayes nodded. Elias is right. Besides, can't have outsiders coming in here making threats. Bad for business. Bad for the principle of the thing, Margaret added firmly. Miss Whitmore, you're welcome here. Both of you are. The acceptance, grudging as it might be, seemed to break something in Elias. He'd spent so long as the town pariah, the frightening hermit to be avoided, that being included, being part of we again, left him momentarily speechless. Clara squeezed his hand. Thank you, all of you. They finished their shopping with less scrutiny, though the atmosphere remained charged. As they prepared to leave, Tom Morrison pulled Elias aside. That woman of yours, she's something special. She's not my woman, Elias said automatically, then caught himself. I mean, she doesn't belong to anyone. Tom smiled. No, but you belong to each other. Any fool can see that. Hold on to her, Elias. Second chances don't come often in these mountains. The journey back to the cabin was quiet, both of them processing the day's events. Finally, Clara spoke. They accepted us. They accepted you. I'm just the lucky bastard you're inexplicably attached to. She reined midnight to a stop, forcing Elias to look at her. You're the man I love, the man who saved me in every way a person can be saved. Don't you dare diminish that. Clara said, No, listen to me. You think you're broken, damaged, unworthy of happiness, but you're wrong. You're the strongest, kindest, most honorable man I've ever known. You've suffered loss that would destroy most people, and yes, it changed you, but it didn't break you. Not completely. There was enough left for me to find to help heal. What if I disappoint you? What if I can't be what you need? Then we'll figure it out together. That's what people do when they love each other. He reached up, pulling her down from the horse and into his arms. How did you get so wise? Boston Finishing School, she said with mock seriousness. They teach you how to handle difficult men. Is that what I am, difficult? Tremendously, but worth it. They made camp by the creek that night, not eager to rush back to the cabin. The spring evening was warm enough to sleep under the stars, and they lay on their bedrolls, watching the constellations emerge. Tell me about the letters, Elias said eventually. The real story. Clara sighed. I started gathering information almost immediately after Richard announced our engagement. Something about him felt wrong, dangerous. I thought if I had leverage, I could convince him to break the engagement himself. But the more I learned, the more I realized he'd never let me go. Men like Richard see people as possessions. Losing me would be losing face, and that's unacceptable to him. So you ran. I ran, but not before I documented everything and arranged for the letters to be held by various people, a sympathetic aunt, a journalist who owes me a favor, even a minister who was horrified by what Richard had done. You planned it all. I had to. I knew he'd come after me. She rolled onto her side, facing him. I didn't plan on you, though. You were a beautiful surprise. Beautiful, I think you hit your head harder than I thought in that crash. She traced the scar that ran through his eyebrow, the one he'd gotten breaking up a bar fight in his younger days. Beautiful. Every scar, every line, every gruff word that barely hides how much you care. They made love there by the creek under the vast Montana sky, with only the stars as witness. It was different from the careful, tender encounters in the cabin, something wild and free, as if the mountain itself was blessing their union. Afterward, they lay entwined, listening to the night sounds of the forest. I want to build, Elias said suddenly. Build. Add on to the cabin. Make it bigger. Give you a proper kitchen, maybe a room for whatever comes next. Clara's hand moved to her stomach unconsciously. They hadn't discussed children, but the possibility hung between them like morning mist. You'd want that children after... I don't know, he admitted. The thought terrifies me. But with you, maybe. Maybe we could try to build something bigger than just survival. I'd like that. A family. A real home. It won't be easy. Mountain life is hard on children. Mountain children are strong, Clara countered. Look at the Morrison boy, tough as leather and smart as a whip. Our children would be half Boston society and half mountain wild man. They'd be magnificent. The certainty in her voice made something bloom in Elias's chest. Hope, perhaps, or just the possibility of a future he'd never imagined. They returned to the cabin the next day to find a package on the porch, which immediately put Elias on alert. But it was just a bundle of fabric from Margaret Morrison with a note, "Thought you could use this. Welcome to Cedar Falls. M." She rode all the way up here to leave this. Clara was touched. Mountain people take care of their own, Elias said, remembering Tom's words. And you're one of them now. Clara fingered the sturdy cloth practical browns and blues, but also a length of deep green that would bring out her eyes. I never belonged in Boston. All those years I felt like I was wearing a costume playing a part. But here you're yourself. Here I'm who I was always meant to be. They spent the next weeks in a frenzy of building. Elias had construction skills from his farming days, and Clara proved surprisingly helpful, her mathematical mind excellent at calculating angles and measurements. They added a kitchen with a proper stove ordered from Denver, a small bedroom that could serve as a nursery, and a covered porch where they could sit and watch the sunsets. The work was hard, leaving them exhausted each night, but it was the good kind of tired, the kind that came from building something together. Sometimes Elias would pause watching Clara concentration as she hammered a board into place, her tongue poking out slightly, and he'd be overwhelmed by the simple miracle of her presence. "You're staring again," she'd say without looking up. "Can't help it. Still can't believe you're real." "I'm very real and very hungry. Is it your turn to cook or mine?" The domesticity of it all should have felt constraining to a man who'd lived alone for so long, but instead it felt like coming home. Real home, not just a place to survive. It was in late May as the last snows melted from the highest peaks that Clara made her announcement. "I'm pregnant." Elias dropped the cup he'd been holding coffee, spreading across the floor. "What?" "I'm pregnant. About 2 months along, I think." She watched him carefully, uncertain of his reaction. He stood frozen, a dozen emotions warring across his face: joy, terror, hope, panic. "Elias, say something." A baby. That's generally what pregnant means, yes." He crossed to her in 2 strides, then stopped, hands hovering uncertainly. "Can I?" She took his hands, placing them on her still flat stomach. "Nothing to feel yet, but yes." "A baby," he repeated, wonder creeping into his voice. "Our baby. Our baby. Are you happy?" "I'm terrified, Mum," he admitted. "But also, yes, happy. God. Clara, I never thought I'd have this chance again. Neither did I. Not like this. Not with someone I chose, someone I love." They held each other in their expanded kitchen, surrounded by the evidence of their building, their planning, their hope for the future. "We'll need to make the town run more often," Clara said practically. "I'll need supplies, maybe a midwife when the time comes." "Doc Morrison's wife does midwifing. She's good help deliver half the children in the valley." "Will she come up here?" "For you. After you stood up to those hired guns, she'd probably move in if you asked." Clara laughed, then sobered. "What about Richard?" "If he learns about the baby, then we'll deal with it, together, like we always do." But Richard Peyton, it seemed, had finally gotten the message. Summer passed without incident, then autumn. Clara's belly growing round with promise. The town had fully embraced them now, women stopping by with baby clothes and advice, men helping Elias with the heavier construction as he continued to improve the cabin. It was November, with Clara heavy with child and the first snows beginning to fall when Sheriff Coleman rode up to the cabin. "Got news," he said, accepting the coffee Clara offered. "Richard Peyton's dead." They both froze, staring at him. "Dead?" Clara's hand went protectively to her belly. "Shot in New York. Seems he crossed the wrong business partner, man named Vanderbilt, who didn't appreciate Peyton's methods." "When?" Elias asked. 3 weeks ago. I just got confirmation. Thought you'd want to know." Clara sank into a chair, emotions warring across her face. "He's really gone. Really gone. His empire's being carved up by competitors. Nobody's going to care about his old grievances." After the sheriff left, Clara was quiet for a long time. "How do you feel?" Elias asked finally. "Free," she said simply. "For the first time in my life, truly free." She looked up at him. Is it wrong that I'm not sad? He was a human being after all. Being human doesn't automatically make someone worthy of mourning. He chose his path, and I chose mine. She stood moving to the window where she could see the peaks already white with snow. I chose you. I chose this place. I chose our life. Any regrets? She turned smiling with such pure joy it took his breath away. How could I regret the thing that saved me? Their daughter was born during a blizzard that December, as if the mountain itself was welcoming her. Margaret Morrison and Doc Morrison's wife had made it up just in time, though it was Elias who caught the baby when she arrived faster than expected. Just like her mother, he said, placing the squalling infant on Clara's chest. In a hurry and dramatic about it. Just like her father, Clara corrected, exhausted but radiant. Strong and perfect. They named her Margaret Sarah for the past Margaret, for the woman who'd welcomed Clara when she needed it most. She's got your eyes, Margaret Morrison observed, cleaning up with practiced efficiency. And Elias's stubbornness, Clara added, as the baby refused to settle until Elias held her. Watching him with their daughter, his massive hands so gentle, his face soft with wonder, Clara felt her heart might burst from happiness. Thank you, she told him later when they were alone with their new family. For what? For saving me that night, for giving me this life, for being brave enough to love again. I could say the same to you. Baby Sarah made a small sound and they both turned to her immediately, already devoted parents. She's going to be trouble, Elias predicted. I can tell. Of course she is. She's ours. As the snow fell outside, blanketing their mountain in pristine white, the Ward family settled in for their first night together. The cabin that had once sheltered a broken man's solitude now held laughter, love, and the promise of tomorrow. The carved wolves still lined the shelves, but now they were joined by Clara's cardinal, and a new piece Elias had just finished, a bear, and her cub, protective and tender symbols of the fierce love that would guard this small family against whatever the world might bring. Outside, real wolves howled in the distance, their song no longer lonely, but celebratory, as if even the mountain recognized that something beautiful had been born from tragedy, something worth protecting, worth celebrating. Clara sang softly to their daughter the same Irish lullaby that had first cracked Elias's defenses while he kept watch at the window. Not because he expected trouble, Richard's death had ended that threat, but because old habits died hard, and he'd never stop protecting what was his. Come back to bed, Clara called softly. We're safe. And they were. Against all odds, despite all obstacles, they were safe, they were together, and they were home. The hermit of Iron Fang Ridge was gone. In his place stood Elias Ward, husband, father, and proof that even the deepest wounds could heal with enough love, enough time, and enough courage to try again. The winter that followed Sarah's birth was the harshest in memory, but inside the Ward cabin, warmth radiated from more than just the stone fireplace. Clara had fashioned a crib from pine branches and soft furs, placing it where the morning sun would touch their daughter's face. Elias found himself waking multiple times each night, not from old nightmares, but from a new need to check that both his girls were still breathing, still real, still his. You're going to wear a groove in the floor, Clara murmured one night, watching him pace with Sarah against his shoulder. The baby had been fussing, but she settled instantly in her father's arms, as if recognizing the hands that had caught her when she entered the world. She's so small, he whispered, still amazed even after 3 months. How can something so small be so perfect? She's not that small anymore. Margaret says she's growing faster than any baby she's seen. Mountain stock, Elias said with quiet pride. She'll be strong. Clara rose from bed, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders, and joined them by the window. Outside, the moon turned the snow-covered peaks into a crystal palace, beautiful and deadly. What are you thinking about? Everything. Nothing. He shifted Sarah to his other shoulder, the movement practiced now. Sometimes I remember that first night finding you in that coach. If I'd decided not to investigate, if I'd turned back. But you didn't. No, something made me keep going. Maybe God, maybe fate, maybe just stubborn curiosity. Maybe love, Clara suggested softly. Maybe it was always love waiting for us to find it. Before he could respond, Sarah made a small sound, not quite crying, but demanding attention. Clara took her settling into the rocking chair Elias had built and began to nurse. It was a scene so domestic, so ordinary, yet it filled him with an emotion too large for words. "I need to check the trap lines tomorrow," he said, forcing himself to think practically. "We're running low on meat." "Take us with you." He looked at her sharply. "It's too cold for the baby." "Not if we bundle her properly. I've been cooped up in this cabin for weeks, Elias. I need to see something besides these walls, beautiful as they are. The snow's deep, dangerous." "Everything up here is dangerous. That doesn't mean we stop living." She was right, of course. Clara had a way of cutting through his protective instincts to find the truth beneath. The next morning, they prepared, carefully wrapping Sarah in layers of fur and fabric until only her tiny face was visible. Clara had fashioned a sling that would keep the baby against her chest, sharing body heat. Midnight was less than pleased about carrying 2 riders and a baby, but he submitted with the resignation of a horse who'd learned that the humans in his life were incomprehensibly complicated. They moved slowly through the forest, Elias leading on foot to break trail, his rifle ready for any danger. "It's beautiful," Clara breathed, taking in the pristine wilderness. Ice crystals hung from every branch like nature's chandelier, and their breath made clouds in the frigid air. "Wait until you see the upper meadow," Elias promised. They climbed steadily, pausing frequently to check on Sarah, who seemed content in her warm cocoon. The traps were mostly empty. The animals were smart enough to stay hidden in this weather, but Elias managed to collect 2 rabbits and reset the lines. It was at the 3rd trap site that they saw them. A wolf pack, 7 strong, moving through the trees, like gray ghosts. Elias immediately stepped in front of Clara and the baby rifle raised. "Don't shoot," Clara said quietly. "They're not hunting us." She was right. The wolves were focused on something else, their attention fixed on a point further up the slope. Then Elias saw it, an injured elk struggling through the deep snow, its back leg dragging uselessly. "They're waiting," he realized, letting it tire itself out. They watched, fascinated, despite the danger as nature played out its brutal drama. The wolves were patient, taking turns to harry the elk, wearing it down without risking injury to themselves. It was strategic, intelligent, and coldly efficient. "They're like Richard's men," Clara said suddenly, circling, waiting for weakness. "No," Elias corrected. "Wolves hunt to survive. They take what they need, no more. Men like Richard hunt for sport, for power, for the pleasure of causing pain. That's the difference." The elk finally fell, and the wolves moved in for the kill. It was quick, merciful compared to the slow death that would have come from infection and starvation. Clara turned Sarah away, though the baby was too young to understand. "We should go," Elias said. "They'll be protective of their kill." But as they moved away, one wolf, the alpha by his size, turned to watch them. For a long moment, predator and protector regarded each other across the snowy distance. Then the wolf huffed a sound almost like acknowledgement and returned to his pack. "He recognized you," Clara said with wonder. "We've shared this mountain for 15 years. We've learned to respect each other's territory. Like you in the town, mutual respect born from distance." "Not anymore," Elias pointed out. "Now I'm practically civilized. Next thing you know, I'll be attending church socials." Clara laughed, the sound bright in the winter air. "I'd pay good money to see that." They were almost back to the cabin when they heard horses approaching, multiple horses moving fast. Elias's hand went to his rifle, but then they heard a familiar voice calling out, "Elias! Clara! Are you there?" It was Ben Hayes, the blacksmith, and he sounded panicked. They hurried the last distance to find Ben and 3 other men from town and their clearing horses lathered with sweat despite the cold. "What's wrong?" Elias demanded. "It's the Morrison boy, Timothy. He's missing. Went out hunting yesterday morning, didn't come back. We've been searching all night, but with this snow—" "Which direction did he go?" "North toward Devil's Canyon. His pa said he was tracking a big buck." Elias cursed. Devil's Canyon was treacherous even in good weather. In winter, it was a death trap of hidden crevasses and avalanche zones. "I know that area, Chet," he said. "Give me 10 minutes to prepare." "Elias," Clara caught his arm. "Be careful. Take Sarah inside. Keep the fire going. I'll bring him back." She wanted to argue, he could see it in her eyes, but she understood. This was what neighbors did for each other. This was what community meant. He gathered rope, medical supplies, and extra blankets, then mounted midnight. The other men would slow him down in the deep snow, but he couldn't tell them not to come. Their friend's son was missing. They rode hard toward Devil's Canyon, Elias reading the landscape for any sign of the boy. The snow had covered most tracks, but he knew how young men thought, especially young men trying to prove themselves. Timothy would have followed the easiest path at first, then been forced higher as the buck climbed. There, he pointed to a disturbed drift. Something went through here. They followed the faint trail, climbing into increasingly dangerous terrain. The wind picked up, throwing snow in their faces, and Elias knew they were running out of time. If Timothy had survived the night, he wouldn't survive another. It was the ravens that led them to him. A cluster of the blackbirds circling a spot near the canyon's edge, their harsh cries audible even over the wind. Elias's heart sank. Ravens meant death usually. But when they reached the spot, they found Timothy Morrison very much alive, though barely. He'd fallen into a crevasse, landing on a narrow ledge about 20 feet down. His leg was clearly broken, bent at an unnatural angle, and his lips were blue with cold. "Timothy!" Ben shouted down. "Hold on, boy!" The kid looked up with glazed eyes. "Mr. Hayes, I'm sorry. The buck, I just wanted—" "Don't talk," Elias ordered, already tying rope around his waist. "Save your strength." He rappelled down carefully, the ice walls of the crevasse treacherous and unstable. Timothy was in bad shape, hypothermic, injured, and going into shock, but he was alive. "This is going to hurt," Elias warned, then fashioned a crude harness from the rope. "But it'll hurt less than dying." The boy screamed when Elias moved him the broken leg, sending agony through his frozen body. But there was no time for gentleness. Every minute in this crevasse decreased his chances of survival. "Pull!" Elias shouted up, and the men began hauling them both out. It was agonizing work, Timothy crying out with every jolt, Elias trying to shield him from the worst of the impacts against the ice wall. When they finally reached the top, both were exhausted. "We need to get him warm fast," Elias said, wrapping the boy in the blankets he'd brought. "Ben, right ahead, tell Doc Morrison we're coming. Have him prepare for a bad break and severe hypothermia." "You're bringing him to town?" one of the men asked, surprised. The cabin was closer. "My wife just had a baby. I won't risk bringing infection or complications there." The word wife came out naturally now, even though they'd never had an official ceremony. In the mountains, saying it made it so. They fashioned a travois from branches and blankets, making the journey to Cedar Falls as smooth as possible for the injured boy. Timothy drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes calling for his mother, sometimes apologizing for losing the buck. "You did good," Elias told him during one lucid moment. "Staying put, conserving energy. That's why you're alive." I remembered what you told me once, about survival being mostly about not making things worse. Elias was surprised. "When did I tell you that?" "Last summer, when you and Miss Clara came to town. I asked you about living alone on the mountain, and you said the key was not making stupid mistakes." "Well, you listened. That's good." They reached Cedar Falls as the sun was setting, the whole town turning out to see them arrive. Timothy's mother burst into tears at the sight of her son, while Doc Morrison immediately took charge, directing them to bring the boy to his office. "You saved him." Tom Morrison gripped Elias's hand hard. "I can't ever repay Tom. No repayment needed. Just doing what anyone would do." "No." Tom disagreed. "Not anyone. The hermit of Iron Fang Ridge wouldn't have cared. But Elias Ward, husband and father member of this community, he cared." The distinction hit Elias hard. Without realizing it, he'd transformed from the mountain's ghost story into a man again connected and vulnerable. Margaret Morrison appeared with hot soup and coffee. "You must be frozen through. Sit, eat." "I need to get back. Clara will be worried." "Not in the dark. Too dangerous even for you." She was right, and Elias knew it. "We have a room above the store. It's yours for the night." He wanted to refuse to return to his family, but exhaustion was setting in. The adrenaline that had sustained him through the rescue was fading, leaving him bone-tired. "Clara will understand," Margaret assured him. "She knows you, knows you'd never leave someone in danger." So Elias Ward spent his first night in town in 15 years lying in a too-soft bed listening to the unfamiliar sounds of civilization. He thought of Clara and Sarah alone in the cabin and had to resist the urge to saddle midnight and ride back despite the darkness. The next morning brought good news. Timothy would recover, though his leg would take months to heal properly. The boy was awake, embarrassed but grateful. "Mr. Ward," he called as Elias prepared to leave. "Thank you, and I'm sorry." "For what?" "For all the times I called you names, made up stories about you being a monster. You're not a monster at all." "Everyone's a monster sometimes," Elias told him, "and everyone's a hero sometimes. The trick is choosing which one to be when it matters." The ride back to the cabin felt longer than usual, anticipation making him push midnight harder than was wise. When he finally crested the ridge and saw smoke rising from his chimney, his heart lifted. Clara was on the porch before he'd even dismounted Sarah in her arms, both of them safe and whole. "Timothy?" she asked immediately. "Alive. Broken leg, but he'll recover." She sagged with relief, then straightened, eyes flashing. "Don't you ever spend a night away without sending word again? I was terrified something had happened to you." "I'm sorry, the dark, the distance. I know, I understand, but I still worried." She reached up to touch his face, feeling the exhaustion there. "You need food and rest." "I need you," he said simply and kissed her there in the doorway, Sarah squeaking between them. That night after dinner and stories of the rescue after Sarah was asleep in her crib, Clara curled against him in their bed. "The town sees you differently now," she said. "You're their hero." "I'm no hero. I just knew the terrain." "You risked your life for a boy who used to fear you. That's heroic." "It's human. Something I forgot how to be for a long time." "But you remember now." "Thanks to you." She was quiet for a moment, then said, "I want to have a ceremony." "A ceremony?" "A wedding. A real one with witnesses and vows and celebration. I know we don't need it, that what we have is already real, but you want the world to know. I want to stand in front of our community and choose you publicly proudly. Is that silly?" "No." He pulled her closer. "We'll do it in spring when the wildflowers bloom. You deserve flowers." "I have everything I deserve right here," she said, but he could hear her smile in the darkness. Winter slowly released its grip on the mountain, each day bringing subtle changes. The ice on the creek began to sing as it melted. Eagles returned to their eyries. And in the Ward cabin, Sarah began to smile, then laugh, transforming from a helpless infant into a tiny person with her own opinions and desires. "She's stubborn," Clara observed one morning, watching Sarah refuse to eat the mashed carrots they'd prepared, spitting them out with decisive disgust. "Wonder where she gets that from," Elias said dryly, earning himself a wooden spoon to the shoulder. It was during one of these peaceful domestic moments that they heard the horses again. But this time there was no urgency in the hoofbeats, no panic in the voices calling out. Sheriff Coleman appeared in the doorway, hat in hand. "Sorry to disturb, but I have news I thought you'd want to hear immediately." "Richard?" Clara asked, though they knew he was dead. "No, ma'am. Your father." Clara went very still. "What about him?" "He's here. In Cedar Falls, says he's come to find you." The peaceful morning shattered like ice in spring. Clara's father, the man who'd sold her to Richard Payton to clear his debts, was here in Montana. "How did he find me?" Clara's voice was steady, but Elias could see her hands trembling. "Same way Payton did, I expect. Money and persistence. He's at the hotel asking after you. Thought you should know before deciding whether to see him." "I don't want to see him." "Clara," Elias said gently, "maybe you should hear what he has to say." She turned on him, eyes flashing. "Would you want to see the person who betrayed you, who sold you like cattle?" "No. But I'd want to know why he came all this way. What he wants." Sheriff Coleman shifted uncomfortably. "There's more. He's not alone. Has a woman with him. Young. Says she's his new wife." Clara laughed bitterly. Of course, father always did recover quickly from loss. She looked at Sarah sleeping peacefully in her crib. "What should I do?" "Whatever feels right," Elias said. "I'll support you either way." She paced the cabin, working through her emotions. Finally, she stopped, decision made. I'll see him, but here on our territory, and only if you're with me. Always. Sheriff Coleman nodded. I'll bring him up tomorrow if that suits. After he left, Clara was quiet, staring out the window at the peaks she'd come to love. You don't have to do this, Elias said. Yes, I do. I need to show him what he threw away, what I gained by his betrayal. She turned to him. I need him to see that his worst decision was my salvation. The next day arrived gray and drizzling fitting weather for the confrontation ahead. Clara dressed carefully in her best homemade dress, the green fabric Margaret had given her bringing out her eyes. She held Sarah, who was dressed in a tiny gown Clara had sewn from her salvaged Boston clothes, a touch of irony she couldn't resist. When the horses appeared in the clearing, Clara stood tall on the porch, Elias beside her with his rifle casually present. Let her father see exactly what kind of life his daughter had chosen. Charles Whitmore looked older than his years, the kind of aging that came from bad decisions and worse consequences. His new wife was indeed young, perhaps 20, with the nervous look of someone who'd learned not to expect much from life. Clara, her father said, stopping at the base of the porch steps. You look well. I am well. This is your husband. He looked at Elias with barely concealed distaste. This is Elias Ward, the man who saved my life in every possible way. I heard about Peyton, his death, the scandal. Is that why you're here, to gloat, to claim credit for my escape somehow? I'm here because you're my daughter. Clara laughed, the sound sharp as winter ice. I wasn't your daughter when you traded me for your debts. I wasn't your daughter when you ignored my pleas for help. I had no choice. He would have ruined me. And instead you tried to ruin me. She shifted Sarah in her arms. This is your granddaughter, Sarah. She'll never know the kind of betrayal you taught me. Charles started forward, perhaps to see the baby better, but stopped when Elias stepped between them. You'll stay where you are, Elias said quietly, but there was steel in his voice. I have rights. She's my daughter. That baby is my blood. You have no rights here, Clara interrupted. You gave them up when you signed me away like property. The young wife finally spoke. Charles, perhaps we should go. Listen to your wife, Clara advised. She seems to have more sense than you do. I came to make amends, Charles said desperately. To explain. There's nothing to explain. You were weak, selfish, and cowardly. You chose your comfort over your daughter's life. That's all the explanation needed. You can't just cut me off. I'm family. No, Clara said firmly. Family protects each other. Family sacrifices for each other. Family loves unconditionally. You're a stranger who happens to share my blood, nothing more. Charles's face reddened. You always were too proud, too stubborn. Look where it's gotten you, living in a shack on a mountain with some savage. That was a mistake. Elias didn't move, didn't threaten, but something in his stillness made Charles step back. This shack is a home filled with love, Clara said. This savage is worth 100 of you, and this mountain is paradise compared to the hell you tried to condemn me to. I could make trouble for you, Charles blustered. A woman living unmarried with a man having his child. We were married, Clara lied smoothly. Last winter by a traveling preacher, all legal and proper if that matters to you. Though given that you tried to sell me to a monster, I doubt propriety is really your concern. Charles seemed to deflate. I heard Peyton left you nothing in his will. I thought you might need help. There it is, the real reason. You thought I might have money. Clara smiled coldly. I have everything I need, more than I ever had in your house. Clara, please, go home, Father, or wherever you call home now. Go back to your new wife and try to be a better husband than you were a father. But don't come here again. You're not welcome. Charles looked like he might argue more, but his wife tugged his arm. Charles, we should leave. They mounted their rented horses, Charles throwing one last look back. You'll regret this, Clara. Blood is blood. Yes, Clara agreed, and poison is poison. Goodbye, Father. They watched the horses disappear down the trail. Only when they were gone did Clara's composure crack. She handed Sarah to Elias and sat heavily on the porch step, head in her hands. That was harder than facing Richard, she admitted. Elias sat beside her, Sarah peaceful in his arms. You did what you had to do. Did I? Maybe I should have been more forgiving. Forgiveness has to be earned. He came here looking for money, not reconciliation. How did you know? The way his eyes kept tracking to your fingers looking for rings. The way he assessed the cabin calculating value. Men like that don't change. Clara leaned against him. I feel free. Finally, completely free. No Richard to fear, no father to disappoint. Just us. Just us. Elias agreed, kissing the top of her head. Spring arrived in earnest after that, the mountain exploding with color as wildflowers carpeted the meadows. They chose a date in May for the wedding, sending word to town. To their surprise, most of Cedar Falls wanted to attend. We'll never fit everyone in the cabin, Clara worried. We'll have it outside, in the meadow, where the columbines grow. Margaret Morrison and several other women from town arrived the day before, arms full of fabric and flowers, determined to give Clara a proper wedding despite the rustic setting. You saved the Morrison boy, Margaret explained when Clara protested it was too much. You stood up to those hired guns. You're one of us now and we take care of our own. They transformed the meadow into something magical. Wildflowers woven into garlands, white cloth draped from trees' benches constructed from split logs. It was rustic but beautiful, perfectly suited to the mountain setting. The morning of the wedding, Elias was banished from the cabin while the women prepared Clara. He found himself at the creek where they'd first made love under the stars, wondering at the journey that had brought them here. Ben Hayes found him there. Nervous, terrified, Elias admitted. Good. Means it matters. Ben handed him a flask. Liquid courage. I don't need courage for this. Clara's the best thing that ever happened to me. Second best, Ben corrected, nodding toward where Tom Morrison was walking with Sarah, the baby, laughing at something he was doing. That little one's going to rule this mountain someday. When it was time, Elias stood at the makeshift altar wearing his cleanest shirt and new pants Clara had made him. The crowd, larger than expected, fell silent as Clara appeared at the edge of the meadow. She wore a simple white dress that Margaret had helped her make wildflowers woven into her dark hair. She carried Sarah, who wore a tiny white gown and seemed to understand this was an important day. But it was Clara's smile that stopped Elias's heart, radiant, certain, and entirely focused on him. Sheriff Coleman, who had the authority to perform marriages, stood ready with the words. But as Clara reached Elias, she spoke first. I want everyone here to know something, she said, her voice carrying across the meadow. I came to this mountain broken, running from a life that was killing me slowly. I expected to die in that blizzard. Instead, I found life. Real life. With a man who showed me that love isn't about possession or control, but about choosing each other every day, even when it's hard. She turned to Elias. You saved me, but more than that, you let me save myself. You gave me the space to become who I was always meant to be. And I choose you, Elias Ward. Today, tomorrow, and all the days after. Elias had prepared words, but they fled. Instead, he spoke from his heart. 15 years ago, I came to this mountain to die slowly, to disappear. You crashed into my life and refused to let me stay disappeared. You brought light into my darkness, hope into my despair. You made me remember how to be human again. He took her hand, feeling the calluses that matched his own now. I choose you too, Clara, you and Sarah and whatever children might come. I choose the life we're building together. Sheriff Coleman cleared his throat. Well, I had a whole ceremony prepared, but seems like you two have said what matters. Anyone object to these two getting married? Silence from the crowd, though a few chuckles at the question. Then by the power vested in me by Montana territory, I declare you husband and wife. Kiss your bride, Elias. He did deeply and thoroughly while the crowd cheered and Sarah squealed between them. When they parted, Clara was crying and laughing simultaneously. The celebration lasted until sunset. There was food, everyone had brought something, and music from a fiddle someone produced, and dancing in the meadow as the sun painted the peaks gold. Even Elias danced awkwardly but earnestly, making Clara laugh with delight. As the party wound down and people prepared for the journey back to town, Timothy Morrison approached on crutches, his legs still healing. Mr. Ward, Mrs. Ward, he said formally, I wanted to thank you again and to give you this. He handed Elias a small carved wooden horse, crude but clearly made with effort. I made it while my leg was healing. It's not as good as your wolves, but it's perfect, Clara said, taking the horse gently. We'll put it where Sarah can see it. As the last guest departed, Elias and Clara stood in their meadow, watching the stars emerge. Sarah slept in Clara's arms, exhausted from all the attention. No regrets? Elias asked. Only one. His heart stuttered. What? I wish we'd found each other sooner. Think of all the years we could have had. We have them now. That's what matters. They walked back to their cabin, their home, and put Sarah in her crib. Then they stood together at the window, looking out at their mountain, their world. What do you think our life will be? Clara asked. Hard sometimes. Winter's always coming in the mountains. There'll be struggles, losses, challenges we can't imagine yet. But we'll face them together, and that makes all the difference. Clara smiled, leaning into him. Together. Outside, wolves howled in the distance, their song carrying across the peaks. But inside the cabin, the Ward family was warm, safe, and complete. The hermit's silence had been broken, replaced by something far more powerful. The sound of lives intertwined, of love, renewed, of hope, restored. The seasons turned as they always did in the mountains, but now Elias marked time differently. Not by solitary survival anymore, but by Sarah's first steps in the autumn leaves, her first words that winter by the fire, the way she squealed with delight when spring brought baby rabbits to investigate their garden. Clara had transformed the land around their cabin into something productive and beautiful, coaxing vegetables from the stubborn mountain soil, creating order from wilderness without destroying its essential wildness. It was during Sarah's second summer, as Clara taught their daughter to identify edible berries, that Elias noticed the changes in his wife. The familiar signs that made his heart race with equal parts joy and terror. You're pregnant again, won't? He said that evening, not a question, but a recognition. Clara smiled over her mending. Your observation skills remain sharp, mountain man. About 3 months along, I think. How do you feel about it? Terrified. Excited. Everything I felt with Sarah, but different too. We know what we're doing now. Do we? Elias moved to sit beside her, his hand finding her still flat stomach. Every child is different. This one might be nothing like Sarah. God help us if this one is exactly like Sarah. She tried to pet a bear cub yesterday. She what? Don't worry, the mother was nowhere near, and I got her away quickly. But she has absolutely no fear, that child. She gets that from you. From both of us, Clara corrected. We're raising a child who thinks befriending wolves is perfectly reasonable. As if summoned by the mention of her name, Sarah toddled into the room, her dark hair wild from playing outside. At 2 years old, she was a perfect mixture of both parents, Clara's delicate features, with Elias's intense eyes, Boston refinement tempered by mountain wildness. Papa, look. She held up a beetle she'd found, presenting it like a treasure. That's a good one, Elias said seriously, examining the insect. See the patterns on its back. That means it's healthy. Sarah studied the beetle intently, then carefully set it on the windowsill. Go home, bug. Mama bug, waiting. Clara and Elias exchanged glances over their daughter's head. She had such empathy, such understanding of connection, even at her young age. That night after Sarah was asleep, they lay together discussing the future. We'll need more room, Clara said practically. 2 children in that small space. I've been thinking about that. What if we built a proper second floor, made this a real house instead of just an improved cabin? Can we do that? With help. Ben Hayes owes me a favor, and Tom Morrison's been offering to help expand ever since Sarah was born. It's what neighbors do. The word neighbors still felt foreign in Elias's mouth, but less so each time he said it. The mountain hadn't become crowded. The nearest homestead was still miles away, but it no longer felt isolated either. They were part of something larger now, a community that stretched from their ridge to the town below. Construction began in late summer, men from town riding up on weekends to help raise walls and set beams. Clara kept them fed. Sarah kept them entertained, and slowly a second story emerged from what had been a simple cabin. By the time the first snows fell, they had 2 proper bedrooms, a larger living space, and even a small room Clara designated as a library, filling it with books she'd ordered from Denver. It's becoming quite civilized up here, Margaret Morrison observed during one of her visits. She'd taken to coming up monthly, bringing supplies and gossip in equal measure. Next thing you know, you'll have a piano. Don't tempt me, Clara laughed. Though I'm not sure how we'd get it up the mountain. Where there's a will, Margaret said, then grew serious. How are you feeling, the baby? Strong. This one's a fighter, I can tell. Different from Sarah, more restless. A boy, perhaps. Perhaps. Elias thinks so. Says I'm carrying differently. And what does Elias know about such things? More than you'd think. He's helped deliver half the livestock on this mountain. Margaret laughed. Well, a baby's not much different, I suppose. Though don't tell him I said that. But as winter deepened, Clara's pregnancy became more difficult. She was sick in ways she hadn't been with Sarah, weak and pale despite eating well. Elias watched her with growing concern. Memories of another pregnancy, another time haunting his dreams. I'm fine, Clara insisted one morning, though she could barely keep breakfast down. Just this baby being particular. You need a doctor. The nearest doctor is in Cedar Falls, and I'm not traveling that trail in this condition. Then he'll come here. Elias, be reasonable. Doc Morrison can't make that journey in winter just for pregnancy complaints. But Elias had already made up his mind. He saddled midnight that very day, leaving Clara under Sarah's watchful protection, their 2-year-old taking her guard duties very seriously, and rode hard for town. Doc Morrison listened to his concerns with the patience of a man who'd dealt with worried fathers before. Women have difficult pregnancies sometimes, Elias. It doesn't mean anything's wrong. Will you come? Of course I'll come. But you need to prepare yourself if something is wrong. There might not be much I can do this far from proper facilities. They made the journey back in record time, Elias pushing harder than was safe. When they arrived, Clara was sitting by the fire, Sarah in her lap, both of them fine. You rode to town in a blizzard for this, Clara scolded, though her eyes were soft with affection. Doc Morrison examined her thoroughly, then pulled Elias aside. The baby's positioned wrong. Breech and sitting low. She's going to need careful monitoring. What does that mean? It means when her time comes, it's going to be difficult, dangerous potentially. You should consider having her come to town for the final month. I won't leave, Clara said firmly, having heard every word. This baby will be born here like Sarah was. This is our home. Doc Morrison sighed. Then I'll come when it's time. Send word the moment labor starts, and pray the weather cooperates. The winter months passed slowly, each day a balance between joy and worry. Sarah grew more verbal, chattering constantly about everything she observed. She'd appointed herself the baby's protector, patting Clara's growing belly, and singing to it in a made-up language only she understood. Baby sad, she announced one day in February. Baby wants out. Soon, sweetheart, Clara told her, though she felt it too, the restlessness of the child within the sense of impending change. It was March during a late-season blizzard that reminded everyone winter wasn't done with them yet when Clara's water broke. Elias had been preparing for this moment for weeks, but still felt panic rise in his throat. Get the doctor, Clara gasped through the first contraction. Now. I can't leave you, not in this storm. You have to. Sarah and I will be fine. Go. He rode harder than he'd ever ridden midnight, struggling through drifts that came up to his chest. The storm was so fierce he could barely see 10 feet ahead, navigating by instinct and memory alone. By the time he reached Cedar Falls, both horse and rider were exhausted. She's in labor, he gasped to Doc Morrison. The baby, you said it was breech, what? Margaret Schutzol, Doc Morrison called to his wife. Get my bag and Sarah's birthing kit. We're going up the mountain. And in this storm, that's suicide. That woman saved our son, Tom Morrison said, already pulling on his coat. We're going. They made a small convoy, Doc Morrison, Margaret, Tom, and even Ben Hayes, who insisted on coming to help however he could. The journey back was a nightmare of wind and snow, but they pressed on, driven by Elias's desperate urgency. When they finally reached the cabin, they could hear Clara's cries from outside. Elias burst through the door to find her on the bed, Sarah sitting beside her with a wet cloth trying to help. Mama hurt, Sarah said solemnly. Baby stuck. Margaret immediately took charge, shooing the men out, except for Doc Morrison. This is women's work now. Elias, take Sarah and keep her calm. I'm not leaving. You are... Clara gasped between contractions. Please, Elias, take care of our daughter. He wanted to argue to fight to stay by her side, but Sarah's frightened face decided him. He scooped up their daughter and carried her to the kitchen where Tom and Ben were building up the fire. Mama okay? Sarah asked. Her little face scrunched with worry. Mama's strong, Elias told her, though his own fear was choking him. The doctor's helping her. For hours they waited, Clara's cries piercing the walls. Sarah eventually fell asleep in Elias's arms, exhausted from worry, but he remained rigidly awake, counting every scream, every silence. It was Ben who kept him sane, talking steadily about nothing plans for spring, planning a new horse. He was thinking of buying anything to fill the terrible waiting. She's strong, Ben said for the dozenth time. Strongest woman I've ever met, including my own wife, and don't tell her I said that. Strength isn't always enough, Elias said darkly, remembering another night, another struggle, another loss. No, but love helps. And that woman loves you and that little girl more than life itself. She won't give up. Just before dawn, when the storm had finally blown itself out and the world lay silent under fresh snow, a new sound pierced the quiet, a baby's cry, strong and angry. Margaret appeared in the doorway, exhausted but smiling. You have a son, Elias, and before you ask, Clara's fine, tired but fine. Elias nearly collapsed with relief. He handed the still sleeping Sarah to Tom and stumbled into the bedroom. Clara lay propped against pillows, pale and sweat-soaked but gloriously alive, holding a bundle of blankets. Come meet your son, she said weakly. The baby was smaller than Sarah had been, but his cry was mighty. He had Clara's nose and what looked like Elias's stubborn chin. When Elias took him, the baby immediately quieted, staring up with unfocused eyes. He knows you, Clara murmured. I told him all about his papa while we were waiting. You could have died, Elias said, the fear finally spilling out. When I heard you screaming. But I didn't die. I'm right here. We're all here. Doc Morrison appeared, wiping his hands. It was a difficult birth, but she handled it remarkably. The boy's healthy, good lungs on him. You'll need to watch for fever the next few days, keep them both warm and rested. Thank you, Elias said, meaning it with every fiber of his being. All of you. Like Tom said, Ben replied from the doorway. We take care of our own. They named the boy James after the child Elias had lost a way of honoring the past while embracing the future. Sarah was instantly smitten with her brother, wanting to hold him constantly, singing her made-up songs to keep him happy. My baby, she declared possessively when Margaret tried to help with him. He's Mama and Papa's baby, Clara corrected gently. But you're his big sister. That means you protect him. Protect, Sarah repeated solemnly. Like Papa protects us. As spring fully arrived and Clara recovered her strength, life settled into new rhythms. James was indeed different from his sister, where Sarah had been calm and observant. James was demanding and restless, always wanting to be held, moved, engaged with. Elias took to carrying him in a sling while working the baby content as long as he was in motion. He's going to be trouble, Clara observed one afternoon, watching James try to roll over at barely 3 months old. He wants to explore everything. Good. The mountains need explorers. The mountains need survivors first. He'll be both. Look at his parents. It was a warm June morning when they saw the rider approaching, moving slowly up the trail. Elias immediately reached for his rifle. Old habits died hard but relaxed when he recognized Sheriff Coleman's distinctive gray horse. Morning, folks, the sheriff called, dismounting carefully. Beautiful day. What brings you up here? Elias asked, noting the official-looking papers in Coleman's saddlebag. Couple things. First, wanted to let you know there's been some interest in homesteading up this way. 2 families from back east looking for land. Clara and Elias exchanged glances. Their isolation, already compromised, was about to shrink further. Where? Clara asked. Other side of the ridge near Beaver Creek. They're good people from what I can tell. Farmers, not miners or hunters. Thought you should know you'll have neighbors. Real neighbors, not just the town below. And the second thing, Elias prompted. Coleman pulled out an envelope sealed with official marks. This came for Mrs. Ward, from Boston. Clara took the letter with trembling hands. The return address was from a law firm she recognized, one that had handled her mother's estate years ago. She opened it carefully, read in silence, then sat down hard on the porch step. Clara. Elias was beside her immediately. What is it? My aunt. My mother's sister in California. She died. Clara looked up, tears in her eyes, but also something else wonder. She left me everything. Her estate, her investments. Elias, it's a fortune. The sheriff whistled low. Well, that's something. What will you do? Clara stood the letter crumpling in her hand. Nothing. We have everything we need right here. Clara, Elias said carefully, this could mean education for the children's security. We have security. We have education. I'll teach them myself. We have everything that matters. She looked at the sheriff. Please write back that I decline the inheritance. Let it go to charity or distant relatives or whoever else might want it. You're sure? Coleman asked. That's a lot of money to walk away from. I walked away from a lot of money when I left Boston. I've never regretted it. She took Elias's hand. Money couldn't buy what we have here. After the sheriff left, shaking his head at what he clearly thought was foolishness, Elias pulled Clara close. You could have had an easier life. I have the life I chose, the life I want. She gestured to where Sarah was trying to teach James to pet a butterfly, the baby grabbing at air while his sister laughed. Would money make this moment better? Would it make the sunrise more beautiful or your arms more comfortable? You're either the wisest woman alive or completely insane. Both, oh, she said cheerfully. It's a mountain thing. The new neighbors arrived in July, the Hendersons and the Kowalskis, both families with children near Sarah's age. The first meeting was awkward. They'd clearly heard stories about the hermit of Iron Fang Ridge, but Clara's warmth and Sarah's immediate friendship with their children broke the ice. You've been here how long? Mrs. Henderson asked, amazed at the flourishing garden and expanded cabin. 4 years now, Clara replied. Best 4 years of my life. But the isolation. Don't you miss civilization? This is civilization, Clara said simply. Just a different kind. The women became friends, sharing recipes and child-rearing advice, while the men helped each other with the heavy work of mountain living. Elias found himself oddly comfortable with these new neighbors, perhaps because they looked at him with fresh eyes, seeing the husband and father, rather than the hermit he'd been. It was during a shared dinner in August, all three families gathered at the Ward cabin, that young Peter Kowalski asked the question everyone wondered about. Mr. Ward, why do you have so many wolves? Everyone looked at the carved wolves lining the shelves. Dozens of them now, each unique. Elias was quiet for a moment, then picked up one of the earliest ones, crude and rough compared to his recent work. I started carving these when I lived alone. They were company of sorts. Wolves understand solitude, but also pack loyalty. They survive through both independence and connection. And now, Mrs. Kowalski asked gently, now they remind me of the journey, from lone wolf to pack leader. He gestured to his family, to the gathered friends. This is my pack now. Sarah, who'd been listening intently, stood up and retrieved something from the shelf, Clara's cardinal, the first piece she'd ever carved. Mama made this, she announced proudly. It's a heaven bird. A heaven bird? Mrs. Henderson asked. Cardinals are messages from heaven, Clara explained, from loved ones watching over us. My mother believed that. And you. Clara looked at Elias, at their children, at the friends gathered in their home. I believe love transcends everything death distance time. The people we've lost are still with us, just differently. As if in agreement, a wolf howled in the distance, answered by another, then another, until the night filled with their song. The children pressed to the windows, excited rather than afraid, while the adults listened to the wild chorus. They're saying good night, Sarah informed everyone with authority. How do you know? Peter Kowalski asked. Papa told me. Wolves talk just different than us. The evening ended with promises of more gatherings of shared harvests and combined efforts to prepare for winter. As the neighbors departed, Elias stood on the porch watching lanterns bob down the trail like fireflies. You're not the hermit anymore, Clara observed, joining him. No. Haven't been for a while now. Do you miss it? The solitude. He considered the question. Sometimes. Early morning before everyone wakes, I miss the complete silence. But then Sarah laughs, or James cries, or you sing while you're cooking, and I remember that silence was just another word for emptiness. We could always send you to the mountains for a few days alone, hunting trip or something. I tried that last month, remember? I came back after one night. Because you missed us. Because the cabin felt wrong without chaos in it. Clara laughed, the sound carrying across the clearing to where the real wolves hunted, perhaps wondering what had become of their silent neighbor, who now lived surrounded by the noise of human connection. Autumn came with its usual glory, painting the aspens gold and the undergrowth crimson. James began crawling with determined intensity, following his sister everywhere she'd led him. Sarah had appointed herself teacher of all things, explaining the world to her brother in a mix of real facts and creative interpretation. Trees sleep in winter, she told him seriously. That's why leaves fall. They're blankets. You're teaching him nonsense, Elias said, though he was smiling. It's not nonsense if it makes sense to her, Clara defended. Besides, who's to say trees don't sleep? Science. Science doesn't know everything. It doesn't know why you chose to save me that night, or why we fell in love, or why Sarah can actually seem to communicate with your horrors. She cannot communicate with midnight. As if to prove her wrong, Sarah walked to the window and called out in a singing voice. Moments later, Midnight appeared from his shelter, walking directly to where Sarah stood. Coincidence, Elias muttered, but he was less certain than he sounded. The first snows came early that year, September, bringing a dusting that warned of the winter ahead. The three families worked together to prepare, sharing the labor and the resources. The Hendersons had brought apple seedlings that might survive at altitude, the Kowalskis had chickens that were already producing eggs, and the Wards provided game and knowledge of the mountain's moods. It was during one of these communal workdays that they heard the news from town. Tom Morrison rode up, his face grave. There's been an accident at the mine over in Silver Creek. Cave-in. They're asking for anyone who can help with the rescue. Without hesitation, the men began preparing to leave. But Clara caught Elias's arm. Be careful, please. Always am. No, you're always brave. There's a difference. He kissed her, then kissed both children. I'll come back. Promise. The rescue efforts lasted 3 days. 7 men were trapped, and it took careful, dangerous work to reach them. Elias's knowledge of rock formations, learned from years of reading the mountain's structure, proved invaluable. When they finally broke through to the trapped miners, 5 were still alive. The journey home was exhausting, but Elias felt something he hadn't experienced in years, the satisfaction of being part of something larger than himself, or even his family. Community meant showing up when needed, risking yourself for strangers who would do the same for you. Clara was on the porch when he crested the ridge, James in her arms, Sarah at her side. The relief on her face was quickly replaced by pride as she saw the other men with him, all safe, all returned. How many yet? She asked. 5 saved, 2 were already gone. You did what you could. We did what we could. All of us together. That night, as they lay in bed with the children finally asleep, Clara traced the new scratches on his hands from the rescue work. You're becoming quite the hero, Mr. Ward. I'm no hero. Tell that to the 5 families who got their men back. Anyone would have done the same. No, Clara said firmly. The old Elias, the hermit, he wouldn't have gone. He wouldn't have cared enough to risk himself for strangers. But this Elias, my Elias, he goes without question, because that's what good men do. You changed me. We changed each other. That's what love does. Winter settled over the mountain like a familiar blanket, no longer threatening, but simply part of the rhythm of their lives. The 3 families had developed a system of checking on each other, signal fires that meant all is well, and different patterns for different needs. One evening in December, as snow fell steadily outside, Sarah looked up from the book Clara was reading to her. Mama, will we always live here? Where else would we live? The place in the stories, with castles and princes and big cities? Clara closed the book, considering her answer. Those are wonderful places to visit in stories, but this is our real place. This mountain, this cabin, this family, this is our happily ever after. Even when it's hard, especially when it's hard, easy happiness isn't as strong as the kind you have to work for. Sarah seemed satisfied with that, But later Elias found her standing at the window watching the snow fall. "What are you thinking about, little wolf?" She'd earned the nickname by trying to howl along with the packs, her high-pitched attempts making even Elias laugh. "When I grow up, will I have to leave? Not unless you want to. What if I want to see the world? Then you see it, and if you want to come back, we'll be here. Promise." Promise. But even as he made the promise, Elias knew that children grew left, made their own lives. Sarah wouldn't always be content with the mountain's boundaries. Neither would James. They would want more, see more, be more, than what this isolated paradise could offer. "She's already thinking beyond us," he told Clara that night. "Good. We're raising them to be independent, strong, capable of making their own choices. But what if they choose to leave? Then we'll have done our job right. We'll have raised children confident enough to explore, secure enough to leave, loved enough to come back." You make it sound simple. Love is simple. It's fear that makes things complicated. Christmas came with handmade gifts and neighbors gathering. The Kowalski children performed a nativity play with Sarah as Mary and James as a very wiggly baby Jesus. The Henderson twins sang carols they'd learned back east. And Elias, coaxed by Clara and fortified by Tom Morrison's homemade whiskey, told the story of the first Christmas he'd spent in the cabin alone and planning to let the cold take him only to be saved by midnight's arrival. "God sends us what we need when we need it," he concluded, looking at Clara, "even when we don't know we need it." "Amen," said Mrs. Henderson, and everyone raised their glasses in agreement. As the gathering wound down and families prepared for the trek home through the snow, Sheriff Coleman appeared with another rider, both looking frozen and urgent. "Sorry to interrupt," he said, "but we have a situation. There's a woman and 2 children lost on the mountain. Their guide abandoned them when the weather turned. We're organizing search parties." Without hesitation, every adult began preparing. The women would stay with all the children at the Ward cabin while the men searched. "Where were they last seen?" Elias asked, already running through possible routes in his mind. "Near Devil's Canyon. They were trying to reach Cedar Falls from the mining camp." Devil's Canyon, where Timothy Morrison had nearly died, where so many had been lost over the years. "I know that area best," Elias said. "I'll take the north approach. Ben, you and Tom take the south. Henderson, Kowalski, you come with me." They searched through the night lanterns, creating pools of light in the darkness. It was Elias who found them huddled in a snow cave the woman had somehow had the intelligence to dig. She was unconscious, her body covering 2 small boys who were crying but alive. "Get them to the cabin," he ordered Henderson. "Fast. Coleman ride for Doc Morrison." They saved them all, though it was close. The woman, a widow trying to reach family in Cedar Falls, lost 2 toes to frostbite, but she lived. Her boys, 8 and 6, recovered completely resilient as children always seem to be. "You saved us," she whispered to Elias when she finally woke warm and safe in the cabin's main room. "We all saved you," said he corrected, gesturing to the crowd of neighbors who'd helped with the rescue and recovery. But she shook her head. "The boys told me. You're the one who found us. You're the hermit they tell stories about." "Not a hermit anymore," Clara said firmly, bringing the woman some broth. "Just a man who knows these mountains well." The widow Mary Fletcher and her boys stayed with them through the worst of winter, until travel was safe again. But when spring came and the passes cleared, she surprised everyone by asking to stay. "Where?" Elias asked. "There's no empty cabin." "We'll build one," Tom Morrison said. "Like we built yours bigger. That's what communities do, they grow." So they built another cabin halfway between the Wards and the Hendersons, and suddenly their mountain community had grown to 4 families. The Fletcher boys, rough and eager from their mining camp life, immediately hero-worshipped Elias, following him on his easier hunting trips, learning the mountain's ways. "You're becoming the patriarch of a small village," Clara teased one evening, watching him teach the combined group of children how to read animal tracks in the mud. "God help us all," he muttered, but he was smiling. Summer arrived with an abundance that felt like reward for the harsh winter they'd survived together. The expanded community had created something none of them had expected: a true settlement on Iron Fang Ridge, unmarked on any map but real as the sunrise that painted the peaks each morning. Sarah, now 5, had become the unofficial leader of the children, organizing expeditions to gather berries, and teaching the younger ones her mother's songs. James at 2 toddled after his sister with determined devotion, his vocabulary consisting mainly of no, mine, and Sarah do it. It was during one of these peaceful mornings that Elias noticed Clara watching their children with an expression he couldn't quite read. She stood at the kitchen window, one hand resting on her stomach in a gesture he recognized. "Again?" he asked softly, moving behind her to wrap his arms around her waist. "Again," she confirmed, leaning back into his embrace. "I think we're building our own small army, Mr. Ward. An army of mountain wildcats, more like. Sarah tried to ride Midnight yesterday. Did she succeed?" For about 3 seconds before he very gently deposited her in the hay pile. "I swear that horse has more patience with our children than I do." Clara turned in his arms, her eyes sparkling with mischief. "Well, he'll need even more patience soon. 3 children, Elias. We're going to be outnumbered." "We already are. Sarah counts for at least 2 on her own." The pregnancy was easier this time, Clara's body knowing the rhythms, the mountain no longer fighting her presence but embracing it. The other women rallied around her with the casual efficiency of those who'd lived through hardship together. Mary Fletcher, the widow they'd saved, proved especially helpful, her boys keeping Sarah and James entertained while Clara rested. It was in September, as the aspens turned gold, that the stranger arrived. He rode a tired horse up the trail, his clothes marking him as Eastern educated, but his eyes holding something harder. Elias met him with rifle in hand, old habits dying hard. "I'm looking for Clara Ward," the man said without preamble. "Formerly Clara Whitmore." "What's your business with my wife?" The man studied Elias with interest. "So you're the mountain man who tamed the Boston Belle." "I'm James Harrison, attorney at law. I have documents requiring Mrs. Ward's signature." Clara appeared on the porch, her pregnancy evident, Sarah and James flanking her like small guards. "Mr. Harrison, I thought I made my position clear about my aunt's estate." "You did, ma'am, but there have been complications. Your father is contesting the will, claiming you're mentally incompetent, living in squalor, possibly held against your will." Clara laughed, the sound sharp as winter ice. "My father? Of course." She descended the porch steps with careful dignity. "Do I look incompetent to you, Mr. Harrison? Do my children appear neglected? Does my home seem like squalor?" The attorney looked around, taking in the expanded cabin, the flourishing garden, the obvious signs of prosperity and care. "No, ma'am. Quite the opposite. But the court requires proof. Your testimony witnesses to your sound mind and voluntary residence here." "Then you shall have it," Clara said firmly. "When what?" "The hearing is in 3 weeks, in Denver." Elias stiffened. Denver was a week's journey each way, too far for Clara to travel in her condition, but before he could object, Clara spoke. "I'll be there." "Clara, you can't." "I can and I will. My father has tried to control me my entire life. This ends now." Mr. Harrison shifted uncomfortably. "There's more, Mrs. Ward. Your father has remarried again. His wife died last winter. His new wife she's Richard Peyton's sister." The silence that followed was deafening. Even the children seemed to sense the sudden tension pressing closer to their mother. "Richard is dead," Elias said flatly. "Yes, but his sister Victoria, she's very much alive. And she blames Mrs. Ward for her brother's downfall and death. She's supporting your father's claim, providing testimony about your supposed instability." Clara's hand went protectively to her stomach. "They want revenge." "They want money," Harrison corrected. "The estate is substantial, enough to restore what the Peytons lost when Richard died." "I don't want the money," Clara said. "I never did." "Unfortunately, if you're declared incompetent, it goes to your father as next of kin, and through his marriage, it goes to Victoria Peyton." Clara's voice was steel. "No, that woman will not profit from her brother's cruelty." The next days were a flurry of preparation. Clara would travel to Denver despite her pregnancy, but not alone. Elias would go, of course, and surprisingly, half the mountain community insisted on accompanying them. "You saved my son," Tom Morrison said simply when Clara protested. "I'm going." "You stood up to hired guns for all of us," Ben Hayes added. We stand with you now. Even Mary Fletcher, still recovering from her ordeal, insisted on coming. You took me in when I had nothing. This is family business, and we're family now. They made a strange procession heading to Denver mountain people in their practical clothes, children riding in the wagon with Clara men armed and watchful. Sarah had insisted on coming, declaring herself her mother's protector, while James stayed with Mrs. Henderson, too young for such a journey. Denver was overwhelming after years on the mountain. The noise, the crowds, the smells, it all pressed in on them like a living thing. But Clara walked through it with her head high, her Boston training serving her well. She knew this world had been raised for it, even if she'd chosen to leave it behind. The courthouse was packed when they arrived. Word had spread about the case, the Boston heiress who'd chosen mountain life over fortune, the mysterious hermit who'd won her heart, the vindictive father trying to steal her inheritance. It was the kind of drama Denver society lived for. Charles Whitmore sat with Victoria Peyton, both dressed in expensive black as if in mourning. Victoria was beautiful in the way a poisonous snake is beautiful, all smooth lines hiding venom, her eyes fixed on Clara with undisguised hatred. Your Honor, the opposing attorney began, we intend to prove that Clara Whitmore— Ward? Clara interrupted. Clara Ward. That name is not legally recognized. Actually, it is. Mr. Harrison stood. I have here the marriage certificate signed by Sheriff Coleman of Cedar Falls, legally binding in Montana territory. The judge, an older man with kind eyes, nodded. Continue. What followed was a systematic assassination of Clara's character. Victoria Peyton testified that Clara had always been unstable, given to fits of hysteria, that she'd seduced Richard, then driven him to desperate measures. Charles added his own poison, claiming Clara had always been rebellious, unmanageable, that her running away proved her inability to make rational decisions. She lives in a shack, Charles said, warming to his theme. Isolated from civilization, married to a man who lived as a hermit for 15 years. What sane woman chooses such a life? When it was Clara's turn to speak, she stood slowly, her pregnancy making grace difficult, but not impossible. She looked at her father for a long moment, then turned to address the judge. Your Honor, I could speak of legal matters of my sound mind and voluntary choices, but instead let me tell you a story. She paused, gathering herself. 4 years ago I was dying, not physically, but in every way that matters. I was being sold, yes, sold to a man who saw me as property. My father had gambling debts, and I was the currency to pay them. That's a lie. Charles started to rise, but the judge gestured him down. I ran, Clara continued. I took what money I could and ran west, hoping to disappear. The stagecoach crashed in a blizzard. Everyone else died. I should have died too, but Elias Ward found me. He saved my life, nursed me back to health, and asked for nothing in return. She turned to look at Elias, her eyes soft. He was broken too, you see. He'd lost his first wife and child, had isolated himself in grief. We healed each other. We chose each other. And yes, I chose his mountain over Boston ballrooms. I chose honest work over idle luxury. I chose love over money. Pretty words. Victoria Peyton stood unable to contain herself. But you killed my brother. Your brother killed himself with his choices, Clara replied calmly. His greed, his cruelty, his inability to accept that women are people, not possessions. I defended myself. I would do it again. Your Honor, Mr. Harrison spoke up. We have witnesses to Mrs. Ward's character and standing in her community. One by one, they testified. Tom Morrison spoke of Clara's help during his son's illness. Ben Hayes described her courage facing down hired guns. Mary Fletcher, voice shaking but determined, told how Clara had taken in a stranger and her children without question. Even Sheriff Coleman had made the journey, testifying to Clara's sound mind and valuable contribution to the community. But it was Sarah who tipped the scales. The 5-year-old had been sitting quietly, but suddenly stood up. Can I talk? She asked the judge directly. The judge smiled. Are you Sarah Ward? Yes, sir. Mama taught me to always be polite to judges because they help people be fair. And what would you like to say? Sarah looked at her grandfather with the piercing honesty only children possess. You're mean. You made Mama cry. But she doesn't cry anymore because Papa and us love her right. And we have a house and horses and friends and baby James and a new baby coming, and Mama teaches us to read and write and do numbers. And she makes the best bread, and she saved Mrs. Fletcher and her boys, and everyone loves her except you. And that's sad because you're missing out." The run-on sentence delivered in one breath left the courtroom silent. Then Sarah added, "Also, we're not poor, we have everything. We even have books from Denver and real glass windows, and Mama's going to teach piano when we get one up the mountain." "Thank you, Miss Ward," the judge said seriously. That was very informative. The judge retired to consider, but was back within an hour. "I find Clara Ward to be of completely sound mind and exceptional character. The inheritance from her aunt stands as written. Furthermore, I'm issuing a restraining order preventing Charles Whitmore and Victoria Peyton from any further contact with the Ward family." He looked directly at Clara. "Ma'am, you could have taken the easy path many times over. That you chose the harder road speaks to strength, not instability. This court wishes you and your family continued happiness." Victoria Peyton stormed out, but Charles lingered, approaching Clara as they prepared to leave. "You've won," he said bitterly. "I won 4 years ago when I left," Clara replied. "This was just paperwork." "What will you do with the money?" Clara looked at her mountain family gathered around her. "Build a school. Bring in a teacher. Maybe get that piano. Use it for the community that actually acts like family should." Charles started to speak again, but Elias stepped between them. "You heard the judge, no contact." They left Denver that afternoon, eager to return to their mountain. Clara dozed against Elias's shoulder as the wagon rumbled along, Sarah chattering to whoever would listen about the big city and its wonders, but how home was better. "You did it," Elias murmured to his sleeping wife. "You faced them down." "We did it," Clara corrected without opening her eyes. "I'm never alone anymore." They reached home to find James had learned 3 new words in their absence: "Where Mama go?" which he repeated until Clara gathered him in her arms, promising never to go anywhere without him again. The baby came early, sparked perhaps by the stress of travel and trial. This time, the community's women were ready, descending on the cabin with practiced efficiency. The birth was quick, almost easy compared to James's arrival. "Another girl," Margaret announced, placing the squalling infant in Clara's arms. "And loud about it, too." They named her Victoria. When Elias raised an eyebrow at the choice, Clara smiled. "We're taking the name back. Our Victoria will be everything Richard's sister isn't: kind, strong, loved. Tori," Sarah decided immediately. "Baby Tori." The money from Clara's inheritance transformed not just their lives, but the entire mountain community. They built a proper schoolhouse, brought in a young teacher from Denver who was seeking adventure. They improved the trail, making it safer for wagons. They even managed to get a piano up the mountain, though it took 8 men in engineering that would have impressed the railroad builders. "Play something," Elias requested. The first evening it was installed, the entire community gathered to see this marvel. Clara sat at the keys, her fingers remembering what her heart had never forgotten. She played a simple melody first, then something more complex, the music filling the cabin and spilling out into the mountain night. "It's beautiful," Mary Fletcher whispered. "It's home," Clara corrected, her fingers never stopping. "Music makes any place home." The seasons turned as they always did. Sarah grew tall and fierce, learning to shoot as well as her father and play piano as well as her mother. James became the explorer they'd predicted, always disappearing into the forest, only to return with treasures, unusual rocks, abandoned birds' nests, once a bear cub, that sent everyone into panic until its mother collected it. Tori was the surprise quiet, where her siblings were loud thoughtful, where they were impulsive. She would sit for hours watching Elias carve, her small fingers tracing the patterns in the wood. "She's going to be the artist," Clara predicted. "Look how she sees things." "She's 3, Elias pointed out. "All she sees right now is whether something's edible." But Clara was right, as she often was. Tori grew into a child who saw beauty everywhere, who could draw with startling accuracy, who heard music in the wind through the pines. It was when Tori was 5, James 8, and Sarah 11 that the letter came that would change everything again. Not delivered by any official messenger this time, but carried by a young man on a tired horse who looked familiar but older, worn. Timothy, Clara gasped. Timothy Morrison. He'd left for college back east 3 years prior, the first from Cedar Falls to do so. Now he stood before them tall and scholarly, but with something broken in his eyes. Mrs. Ward, Mr. Ward, I need help. They brought him inside, fed him, waited while he gathered himself. Finally, the story emerged. He'd gotten involved with the wrong people in Boston, reformers and radicals who talked of changing the world. When violence erupted at a protest, Timothy had been arrested, though he had done nothing but attend. Tom Morrison had spent everything to get his son released, and now Timothy was running west, unsure if the law was following. I didn't know where else to go, he admitted. You saved me once before. We'll save you again, Clara said firmly. Won't we, Elias? Elias studied the young man who'd once feared him as a monster. You're welcome here as long as you need. Timothy stayed through winter, helping with the teaching at the school, sharing his education with eager mountain children. He and Sarah developed a special friendship, the 6-year age gap, meaning nothing in the isolation of the mountains. She's brilliant, Timothy told Clara one day, watching Sarah solve a complex mathematical problem he'd posed. She could attend university if women were allowed. Maybe someday they will be, Clara said. The world's changing. Not fast enough. Change is like spring snowmelt, Elias observed from where he was carving. Slow at first, then all at once, and suddenly the whole landscape is different. Timothy looked at him with surprise. That's quite poetical, Mr. Ward. Mountain philosophy. Live here long enough, you start thinking like the peaks. Spring brought news that the charges against Timothy had been dropped, the real perpetrators caught. He could return east, finish his education, reclaim his life. The night before his departure, there was another community gathering, everyone coming to wish him well. I'll come back, he promised, and his eyes were on Sarah when he said it. You'd better, she replied with all the confidence of 11 years. Someone needs to teach you how to really shoot. After he left, Sarah was quieter, spending more time at her studies, as if preparing for something. First love, Clara asked Elias as they watched their daughter stare down the trail where Timothy had disappeared. First something. She's young still. I was 16 when I first saw you in my fever dreams. Sometimes young hearts know things older ones forget. That's different. We were both adults when we chose each other. Were we, or were we both children broken and trying to pretend we knew how to be grown? Clara leaned against him. Timothy's a good boy. Man now, I suppose. If something develops when Sarah's older, we'll face that when it comes. Mountains teach patience, if nothing else. The school thrived, drawing families from the valley below. Some built cabins, others came for seasons, then returned to town. The settlement on Iron Fang Ridge grew to 8 families, then 10, then enough that it needed a name. What should we call it? Someone asked at a town meeting held in the schoolhouse. Various suggestions flew New Boston. Clara laughed at that mountain's rest Eagle's Peak. Ward's Haven, Mary Fletcher suggested, and heads nodded. Absolutely not, Elias said firmly. We didn't build this alone. Haven's Ridge, Sarah suggested quietly, because it's been a haven for all of us, one way or another. The vote was unanimous. As summer reached its peak, Clara stood in her garden watching her children help with the harvest. Sarah, almost 12, worked with adult efficiency. James, 9, made everything into an adventure. Tori, 6, carefully selected only the most perfect vegetables, creating artistic arrangements that made everyone smile. You did this? Elias said, joining her. We did this. No, the community, the school, the life here, that's you. I just provided the mountain. You provided yourself. That's what made everything else possible. She took his hand, placed it on her stomach. One more. Elias looked at her in shock. Clara, you're 42. I know, it's dangerous, but I feel like there's one more soul waiting to join us. The midwives will say you're too old. The midwives said I'd never survive the first winter. They said our children would be weak from altitude. They say a lot of things. She smiled. When has that ever stopped us? The pregnancy was indeed harder. Clara's body protesting what it had done easily years before. But the community rallied women taking turns helping with household duties, men ensuring the Ward family wanted for nothing. Even the children helped Tori, appointing herself her mother's special helper, bringing tea and telling stories to keep her entertained during bed rest. When labor came in February, the worst possible time, it seemed like the mountain itself held its breath. The birth took 2 days, Clara growing weaker with each hour. Elias never left her side, holding her hand, whispering encouragement, praying to a God he'd long ago stopped believing in. "If something happens," Clara gasped between contractions, "promise me, nothing's happening. You're too stubborn to die." Elias, "No, we don't get to quit now. We have children to raise, a community to anchor years of happiness ahead. You fight, Clara Ward. You fight like you fought for our life here." And she did. When the baby finally arrived, another boy, small but fierce, Clara was exhausted but triumphant. "Last one," she whispered. "I promise." They named him William after no one in particular, a fresh start for their last child. He was different from birth, watchful in a way newborns rarely were, as if memorizing every face, every voice. "He's going to be the smart one," James declared, making everyone laugh since James himself was sharp as a blade. "We're all smart," Sarah corrected with older sister authority. "Just different kinds of smart." Timothy Morrison returned that spring degree, complete ideas, burning bright. He'd been hired to teach at a college in California but wanted to spend the summer in Havens Ridge first. No one missed how his eyes sought Sarah immediately, or how she bloomed under his attention. "She's 13, Elias reminded Clara when they watched the two walking together, properly chaperoned by all 3 younger Ward children. "And he's 19 and leaving in the fall, and nothing improper will happen, because both of them have too much honor." Clara patted his arm. "Stop growling, Papa Wolf. Some things are worth waiting for. We were." The summer passed in a golden haze. Timothy helped expand the school curriculum, teaching Latin and advanced mathematics. Sarah absorbed everything like drought-touched earth absorbs rain. When Timothy left for California, they exchanged a chaste handshake and a promise to correspond. "All right," Timothy said formally, but his eyes said more. "I'll answer," Sarah replied, equally formal, equally meaningful. The letters came regularly, full of news from the wider world, philosophical discussions, careful propriety that couldn't quite hide deeper feelings. Sarah began talking of college of possibilities beyond the mountain of a future that might take her away. "We always knew this might happen," Clara reminded Elias when he brooded about it. "Knowing and accepting are different things. She won't leave forever. This place is in her bones now, like it's in ours." "Is it? Or is it just the only thing she's known?" Clara didn't answer because she wondered the same thing. Would their children stay on this mountain they'd made into paradise? Or would they seek their own frontiers, their own challenges? The answer came gradually, as all important answers do. Sarah announced at 16 that she wanted to attend college to study medicine, to become a doctor who could serve mountain communities. James, now 13, declared his intention to become an engineer to build better roads and bridges to connect isolated places. Even Tori, just 10, spoke of studying art in Paris someday. "They're all leaving," Elias said one night, watching his children plan their futures around the dinner table. "They're all growing," Clara corrected. "Look closer." And when he did, he saw it. Sarah planned to return as a doctor. James wanted to improve the mountain infrastructure. Even Tori spoke of painting the mountains, of showing the world the beauty of their home. "They're not leaving," Clara said softly. "They're extending, taking what we built here and making it bigger, better, more connected to the world." "When did you get so wise?" "Somewhere between my 4th baby and my 5th silver hair." William, now 2, toddled over to his father, raising his arms to be held. Elias lifted him, this last child, who might be the one to stay to continue what they'd started directly. "Papa's mountain?" William asked, pointing out the window at the peaks glowing in sunset light. "Everyone's mountain," Elias corrected. "But we're its keepers for now." "Keepers," William repeated solemnly, as if accepting a sacred charge. That autumn brought the first real challenge to their paradise. A mining company wanted to buy the whole ridge, had even gotten government backing for potential eminent domain. The community gathered in the schoolhouse, fear and anger rippling through the crowd. "They can't just take our homes," Mary Fletcher protested. They can and they will, the company representative said smoothly. He'd come with papers, threats barely veiled his offers. Unless you can prove prior claim or protected status. We've been here for years. Elias stood. We've built, farmed, established a community. Without proper documentation, that means nothing. It was Clara who found the solution, remembering something from her Boston education about land grants and homestead acts. Working with Timothy through their letters, she discovered that the ridge qualified for protection as an educational reserve given the established school and library they'd built with her inheritance. The fight took months' trips to Denver, testimonies from government officials they'd helped or saved over the years. But in the end, Havens Ridge was declared a protected educational community, safe from mining interests. You saved us again, someone said at the celebration. We saved ourselves, Clara corrected. Together. That's what we do. Winter came early and hard that year, but the community was ready. They'd learned the mountain's moods, respected its dangers while refusing to be cowed by them. The school continued even in the deepest snow, children trudging through drifts with determination that would have amazed their city cousins. Sarah received her acceptance to a women's college in Massachusetts that spring, one of the few that would take female students. The night the letter arrived, Elias found her crying in the barn. Second thoughts, he asked gently. How can I leave? Everything I love is here. Not everything. Part of what you love is out there waiting to be discovered, and everything here will be waiting when you return. What if I change? What if I become someone else? Elias pulled his daughter close, this fierce young woman who'd grown from the baby who'd tried to pet wolves. You'll always be Clara Ward of Havens Ridge. That's carved into you deeper than any of my wolves are carved into wood. Go learn, become everything you're capable of being, then come home and share it with us. Papa, she whispered, and for a moment she was 5 again, scared of thunder. I love you. I love you too, little wolf, always. The day Sarah left was bittersweet. The entire community gathered to see her off, Timothy Morrison notably absent, but his latest letter tucked in her pocket. She hugged each sibling, promising James to write about everything. Assuring Tori she'd send art supplies from the city, telling William to be good for Mama and Papa. I'll be home for Christmas, she promised Clara. You'll be home whenever you can. Don't limit yourself for us. As the wagon disappeared down the trail, Elias felt Clara's hand slip into his. First one leaving the nest, she said softly. She'll be back. Different, though. Expanded. More herself. Is that bad? No, it's what we wanted, for them to have choices we didn't have, to become more than we could imagine. That evening, the remaining family felt smaller, but not broken. James immediately claimed Sarah's room. Tori organized her things with careful reverence, and William asked when Sar would come home. Christmas, Clara told him. She'll be home for Christmas. Good, William decided. She needs to see my snow fort. As autumn deepened toward winter, life continued its rhythms. The school thrived under its new teacher, a young woman from Denver who'd come for adventure and stayed for love when she married the Hendersons' eldest son. The community grew by 2 more families, refugees from a failed mining town, who brought skills in blacksmithing and carpentry. One November evening, as early snow began to fall, Elias stood on the porch watching his children, James teaching William to track rabbits, Tori sketching them both with charcoal on precious paper. Clara joined him, a letter from Sarah in her hand. She's happy, Clara reported. Challenged, sometimes lonely, but happy. And Timothy's been visiting from California. Of course he has. She's also top of her class in all subjects. Of course she is. Clara laughed, leaning into him. We did well, didn't we? Elias looked out at their domain, the cabin that had grown into a proper house, the community spread across the ridge, the children who carried their blood and values into the future. We did better than well. We built something worth having, worth fighting for, worth living for. A wolf howled in the distance, answered by another, then another, until the night filled with their wild chorus. But now it didn't sound lonely or threatening. It sounded like the mountain itself was singing, celebrating the life that flourished on its slopes, the love that had transformed isolation into community. Listen, William said, running to them with excitement. The wolves are happy. How do you know? Clara asked, lifting him into her arms. Papa told me. Wolves sing when they're happy, like us. And as if to prove his point, William began to howl his high child's voice mixing with the wild chorus. James joined in, then Tori, then even Clara added her voice. Elias resisted for a moment the dignified patriarch of Haven's Ridge, then threw back his head and howled with his family. Inside the house, the carved wolves stood sentinel on their shelves, watching over Clara's cardinal, the children's various attempts at carving the piano that had somehow made it up the mountain. Each piece told a story of loneliness transformed into love isolation, into community survival, into thriving life. The snow fell harder, winter, asserting its dominion. But inside the Ward house, warmth reigned. Clara played piano while James and Tori sang. William fell asleep in Elias's arms, small fingers clutched in his father's shirt. And somewhere far to the east, Sarah Ward sat in a dormitory room studying medical texts by lamplight, counting the days until she could return to her mountain, her family, her home. "Read Sarah's letter again," James requested. "The part about the city." Clara read about buildings taller than trees, about lectures that challenged everything Sarah thought she knew about missing the mountain silence but finding new music in the city's chaos. "I want to build something that tall," James declared. "But here, on the mountain." "That would be quite a feat," Elias said. "Papa, you built a life on a mountain everyone said couldn't support one. I can build a tower." "Yes," Clara agreed, looking at her family, her home, her unexpected paradise. "Yes, you probably can." The fire crackled. The snow fell. The wolves sang, and the Ward family settled in for another winter night, complete even in Sarah's absence, because love, they'd learned, transcended distance just as surely as it had transcended loss. Fear and all the obstacles that had tried to prevent this moment from happening. Tomorrow would bring challenges it always did in the mountains. But tonight, they were together, they were safe, they were home. And that Elias thought as he held his sleeping son and watched his family was more than enough. It was everything.